Chapter 147. The contents of this cultivation technique were truly brilliant and incisive. Compared to the Xueqi secret manuals that he usually saw, it was many times more brilliant. The more he read, the more shocked he was, and the more he felt the subtlety of this divine technique. This cultivation method is too precious. Shangguan Lingxiu's fair hands gripped the 3 talents cultivation method tightly. I'm afraid that I can't accept it, and neither can the Shangguan family of generals. Yunyang frowned and said, Sister Lingxiu, you're being too serious. We're all children of the martial world, it's better to be more straightforward. I have no use for this cultivation method. Why are you being so courteous with me? It'll be hypocritical if you continue to be so courteous. Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but chuckle, regaining her usual candid self as she said, All right, I'll accept it. Young brother Yun, I'll remember this favor. Yunyang smiled and said, The Shangguan family of generals has given me great honor by accepting my gift. However, Sister Lingxiu, you can't train them like this anymore from now on. Mystical qi cultivation is the priority. You'll also have to pay attention to the heaven and earth treasures, mystical stones and mystical crystals that can increase mystical qi. Right, mystical beast meat as well. It's an indispensable staple supplement for them. This is very important to cultivators who cultivate high-level mystical qi. It can't be neglected. Shangguan Lingxiu nodded heavily and said through gritted teeth, I understand. Yunyang, if the Shangguan family of generals can regain its glory in the future, it's all thanks to you tonight. Sister Lingxiu, you're exaggerating. Yunyang smiled calmly. If so, I'll take my leave. You should go back earlier as well. You don't have to work so hard in the future. Sigh, you might have to work even harder in the future because the financial resources needed to provide for these children's cultivation will be an astronomical figure. You have to be mentally prepared. Thank you. Shangguan Lingxiu stood up and bowed to Yunyang respectfully. Yunyang laughed and turned to leave leisurely. His long silhouette disappeared into the night in the blink of an eye. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed softly, looking at the direction where Yunyang had disappeared. Then, her expression returned to its original hard calmness as she hollered, Come here. Nephews, we're going home. Really? Yes, really. In the future, you don't have to work so hard, and you don't have to come here to train your courage. Really? Wah, that's great. The 6 little guys cheered and hugged each other. Shangguan Lingxiu was delighted to see the 6 little fellows so happy. He clutched the secret manual tightly in his hand, feeling a surge of excitement in his heart. In the future, it will be better. The Shangguan family of generals would recover. Yunyang, thank you. By the time Yunyang returned to the residence of Yun, the sky was already beginning to brighten. The truth was not as coincidental as what Yunyang had told Shangguan Lingxiu. In fact, Yunyang had been watching everything that happened in the Shangguan family of generals for the entire day. This included the 6 children being woken up in the early morning before the sun had even risen to train. First, it was breathing exercises, then long-distance running with weights, followed by various physical exercises. After everything was done, the east was only slightly pale. Yunyang was speechless at the amount of effort he had put in. However, that was just the beginning. What followed was all sorts of training to fully stretch their muscles and bones. Only then did they begin with long and short weapons such as sabers, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks and forks, as well as archery and horsemanship. There was only an hour in the afternoon that was considered a break. However, it was during this break that the children had to read military books and memorize classic battle examples while resting, accompanied by questions from time to time. What could be done to avoid this defeat? What could be done to turn defeat into victory under such circumstances? What could be done to preserve one's strength under such circumstances? Would one choose to retreat and preserve one's strength or fight to the death under such circumstances? Once the answer was wrong, it would be a punishment. Yunyang felt a twinge of jealousy in his heart. These were only a few children. The oldest was only 9 years old while the youngest was only 6. Such training, or rather, such an atmosphere of survival, was simply too cruel. After dinner and a short rest, Shangguan Lingxiu brought them out again to the red light district of the Field of Chaos to find gangsters to fight and practice actual combat, experiencing the uncertainty of life and death. In the dead of the night, it was still not a complete rest. Instead, they were brought to the mass grave to train their courage. What the children had experienced throughout the day sent chills down Yunyang's spine, chilling him to the core. This was a day for the children of a family of generals. Yunyang sighed at the sky. Looking at the female elders in the residence of Shangguan and the numerous memorial tablets in the Shangguan Ancestral Hall, Yunyang could not help but sigh. This was the sacrifice of a family of generals. Of course, Yunyang understood why they had to do this. They did not want to torture these children on purpose. These children were their own flesh and blood. It could even be said that they loved these children more than anyone else. Yet they had to do so. In addition, even if they felt that the training was extremely cruel, they could not prevent something even crueler from happening. These children's destinies and future were already determined when they were born. They would be trained hard since they were young, without a single good day. When they grew up, they would find a wife and settle down. Then they would go to the battlefield. In the end, they would die on the battlefield. They would return with their dead bodies on the battlefield. This was the journey of their lives. Looking at the sorrow in the eyes of the widows and widows when they looked at their children, Yunyang knew that they had long seen this day. Just like what Shangguan Lingxiu had said, no matter how much the military respected the Shangguan family of generals, once they were on the battlefield, they would never allow the descendants of the Shangguan family of generals to survive and rise again. Once that day came, it would be their own nightmare. Since the beginning of time, the legends of the so-called loyal family of generals had always ended up with no descendants, their families broken and dead. There had never been an exception. Without exception. What a tragic fate this is. Why would a family of loyal and meritorious officials meet such a cruel fate? Is this the fate of a general? The reward for doing my best to protect the country? Standing in the morning breeze, Yunyang pondered for a long time. Could the tragedy of the Shangguan family of generals be avoided with Shangguan Lingxiu's current efforts? It was absolutely impossible. Once they stepped into the battlefield, life and death were but a matter of moments. The descendants of the Shangguan family of generals had always been the focus of the enemy. Only when this focus was gone would the others be at ease. Let me give you a hand. Yunyang said faintly, the family of meritorious officials who have shed their blood for the country shouldn't end their bloodline. The Nine Heavens dictum was suddenly bustling with activity as all sorts of news began to pour in. All the important officials in the imperial court are suddenly attacking the military. This is sudden, without any prior signs. There seems to be something wrong with His Majesty's health. He doesn't look too well these days. I suggest that we pay attention. Many of the minor crimes committed by some of the middle and lower level officers are being exaggerated, and their wrongdoings are being pursued with the intention of being punished harshly. There are already 17 assistant generals being imprisoned. I think there must be a big reason behind this. Other than the crown prince, the princes are all close to the civil officials and distant from the military generals. The signs are getting more and more obvious. It looks like the two old marshals of the military are still able to control the situation, but in some minor aspects, they are beginning to retreat. This is not a good sign. Old He is currently bedridden. The crown prince has gone to visit him personally, while His Majesty the Emperor has also visited him. There is no follow-up news regarding the incident of that day. It's gradually becoming inconclusive. The closest generals from various countries have arrived within 500 miles of Tiantang City. A few of the people from the towering wind pavilion that the Supreme Lord wants to investigate have appeared so far, but Xueqi hasn't appeared. It's suspected that he has left Tiantang City. We're currently expanding the search area. Recently, there have been countless martial world figures of unknown origins entering Tiantang City and disappearing into the streets. Should we investigate further? The grassland has been lush this year and its combat power is at its peak. This subordinate estimates that the day of war is not far away. Dongxian, Dayuan, Tianxi, and the other empires are preparing for war, using the entire nation's strength to transport rations. It's said to the public that it's to replenish the national treasury to deal with the legendary drought, but the real purpose is... Yunyang opened the Nine Heavens dictum. Dense, messy news spilled out one after another. After reading through the information, Yunyang could immediately sense the unique smell of war. The military's channels of information regarding the movements of the empires were far more than what he possessed. The imperial court must have long known about the news that he had received. However, with His Majesty the Emperor's intelligence and wisdom, he had yet to react. It was not unusual. The military was only relying on the three marshals, Qiu Jianhan, Lang Daoyin, and Tai Zheng to appeal. They were weak, and the court officials were obstructing them. The situation was not optimistic at all. What puzzled Yun Yang the most was none other than the attitude of the court officials. Even if the literati disliked war and hated the military, even if the politicians suppressed the military in order to gain power, could they not see that the nation's safety was at stake? Why were most people so anti-war? It was strange indeed. Yun Yang did not believe that the court officials were all short-sighted or blinded by the desire for power. His gaze lingered on the movements of the literati for a long time as he pondered. Could this be related to He Hanqing? Could the hand that has been manipulating the empire of Yutong, or at least Tiantang City, be He Hanqing himself? What about His Majesty the Emperor? What's wrong with him? Yun Yang felt his head swell as he pondered. Chapter 148. I'm afraid I'll have to find out for myself. Yun Yang made up his mind and replied to a few of the important messages before putting the 9 heavens dictum aside. He then began to focus on his cultivation to increase his ability. Another day and night passed. Feng Mafei and Lao Mei, who had gotten used to Yun Yang's silence during this period of time, were now going about their own business as usual. Occasionally, they would glance at Yun Yang's room, their gazes filled with worry. Perhaps in the entire world, only the two of them knew how much pressure their young master was under right now. It was a weight that was beyond anyone's imagination. When Yun Yang walked out of the room once more, he saw Feng Mafei looking at him with a hesitant look. What is it? Yun Yang gave him a sideways glance. Speak your mind. Feng Mafei hesitated for a long time before he finally said, Nothing much. Yun Yang frowned and wiped his face with a towel, saying calmly, Was it your 3 sworn brothers with the surname Hu or the concourse of the underworld? Feng Mafei chuckled bitterly. Yun Yang nodded. The concourse of the underworld, is it? Did they ask you to kill someone? Or did they ask you to leave me and return to the martial world? Feng Mafei sighed deeply and said, It was one of the 10 court kings who came to Tiantang this time. I don't know how he found me and asked me to leave this place. Yun Yang's expression did not change. What about you? Of course I won't leave, young master. Feng Mafei said hesitantly. But Lord King Qingguang's methods are impeccable. I'm afraid it will bring trouble to young master. Yun Yang said faintly, When your Lord King Qingguang arrives, tell him that I want to meet him. Feng Mafei replied. Yes. For some reason, Feng Mafei's heart calmed down upon hearing Yun Yang's words. Although his young master's mystical skill was still very weak, Feng Mafei was suddenly relieved. He was filled with endless confidence in his young master. If his young master said it was possible, it would definitely be possible. If his young master was confident, it would definitely be done. You don't have to follow me today. I'm going somewhere alone. Yun Yang said, You can cultivate at home. The earlier I break through to the 8th peak, the better. Yes, young master. Have you already broken through? Feng Mafei looked at the divine glow on Yun Yang's face and asked doubtfully, The 5th peak? Yun Yang smiled faintly and did not answer, walking out the door. The 5th peak. Yun Yang had already broken through to this level a few days ago. During this period of time, his Fog of Cloud, Mystique Wind, and Starfire Mystique skills had all broken through to the 5th stage. Thundercrash Conjuration and Art of Crimson Soul had also broken through to the 3rd stage. These mystical cultivation methods and mystical skills were Yun Yang's greatest reliance at the moment. However, the price to pay for this was all the cultivation resources that he had accumulated previously were used up once again. Profound stones, profound crystals, fine jade, profound cores, heavenly treasures. Right now, Yun Yang felt that he was a typical pauper. Other than gold and silver notes, he had nothing else. He was so poor that he only had money left. Yun Yang went out. A gentle breeze blew past and quietly entered the palace. Then, he appeared once more, but this time, he returned to his residence of Yun. Yun Yang frowned and thought for a moment. Finally, he gritted his teeth and went out again, sprinting towards the marshal's residence. Along the way, he had sensed several times that someone was following him, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not find the stalker. The residence of Yun was not far from Marshal Qiu's residence. In less than an hour, Yun Yang had already arrived at the gates of the marshal's residence. Please report that Marquis Yun's son, Yun Yang, is grateful for old sir's concern and has come today to express his gratitude. Yun Yang was courteous and refined. Please wait a moment, young Master Yun. The guard's reply was equally respectful. After all, the name of Tiantang City's young Master Yun had already spread throughout Yutong and was well known throughout the world. Who did not know of him? If it had been someone else, perhaps they would have felt uncomfortable that they were relying on Ling Xiaozui's reputation to intimidate others. However, Yun Yang was not one to feel uncomfortable. He didn't feel the slightest bit uncomfortable. On the contrary, he was looking forward to some other adventure. It would be even better if he could find another one that he could use as a tiger's skin. For example, Dugu Cho or someone else. Such experts were legends and myths. It would not be too much even if 8 to 10 of them came every day. Use your reputations to suppress these demons for me, so that I have time to plan my affairs. This bastard actually dares to come. Hearing Yun Yang's name, old Marshal Chiu was instantly enraged. He had nowhere to vent the pent-up anger that had been building up in the imperial court for the past few days. This fellow had delivered himself to his doorstep. He was the perfect punching bag. Get that brat to roll in here. The old marshal roared angrily. This sentence almost made the reporting guard laugh out loud. Yun Yang was still calm when he rolled in. Greetings, old sir. It's been a long time since we parted that day. Old sir looks even better than before. What a joyous occasion. This is Yutong's fortune, the world's fortune. Old Marshal Chiu's face darkened, almost suffocating from the compliment. It's good enough that your father hasn't been angered to death by you. This bastard, how dare he say it's been a long time? This old man has been there 3 times. The first time you avoided me, the second and third time you died in bed, unable to even open your eyes. How could this old man have met you? How dare you say that? What fortune? It's Yutong's fortune that this old man is alive and well. It's a fortune to the world as well. Other than the Empire of Yutong, which empire on the continent doesn't wish for this old man to die early? What are you doing here, child? Old Marshal Chiu sat on the armchair and slanted a glance at the child. The more he looked at him, the more he felt that this fellow's handsome face was detestable. He could not help but say viciously, "You're a man, but you have such a pretty face that's softer than a woman's. Aren't you embarrassed to walk around the city with it every day?" Yun Yang grinned. "You're right. I also think that I'm too good-looking, making too many people feel ashamed of themselves. However, I can't be blamed for this. Honestly, I'm not afraid that you'll laugh at me, but I've actually wanted to disfigure my face for a long time now." The old marshal was exasperated. "Spit it out if you have something to say." I'll do it now." Yun Yang chuckled before his expression turned unprecedentedly serious. The old marshal's heart sank when he saw Yun Yang's expression. By the looks of it, this child. Did he really have something to say? "It's like this, old marshal. I wonder if you've noticed that His Majesty isn't quite himself during this period of time?" Yun Yang asked after considering his words. "What?" The old marshal sat up straight, his gaze as sharp as a hawk's. He stared at Yun Yang without blinking. "What are you trying to say?" Yun Yang coughed. "It's not that I want to say, but..." As he spoke, Yun Yang looked left and right, staring at the door. The old marshal did not know whether to laugh or cry. "You've already exposed too much with your previous words, and now you're thinking of keeping it a secret? No one dares to eavesdrop on this old man here." Qiu Jianhan snorted. What was it that made this fellow act so mysteriously? Thinking of this, the old marshal could not help but feel nervous. Well, didn't Ling Xiaozue enter the palace a few days ago? Yun Yang thought about it and felt that it was best to push Ling Xiaozue out. This fellow's reputation was naturally the best choice to be the scapegoat, especially at such a critical juncture. Moreover, he had just entered the palace once, and he had a very good relationship with her. It was just right, logical, and a perfect match. The old marshal was tactful, his expression turning anxious. What did he find out? He told me after he went back that although he had only met His Majesty once, he could see that His Majesty's health is very poor. If he doesn't treat His Majesty soon, I'm afraid that His Majesty's life will be in a few months' time. Yun Yang lowered his voice. Boom! The old marshal kicked his chair over in shock, almost falling to the ground. His face was pale as he stared at Yun Yang, speechless. Old Marshal, don't be agitated. Ling Xiaozue said this, not me, Yunyang explained hurriedly. Is this true? Qiu Jianhan asked word by word. Suddenly, a murderous aura that resembled a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood surged from him. No wonder His Majesty's face has turned gray recently. This old man thought that it was due to exhaustion. How dare you? Yunyang lowered his head and did not speak. The more he spoke, the more mistakes he would make. It was better to remain silent. Since Sir Ling can see through it, then? The old marshal grabbed Yunyang's hand and asked anxiously. He left 3 pills behind, but he didn't say that they would be effective. After all, it was only a glimpse, the results were too little. Yunyang said nervously, but the consequences of this matter are too important. It's really hard for me to find someone else to discuss this with. You actually want to discuss this with someone else? Qiu Jianhan's eyes widened as he paced around the room with a grim expression. Finally, he waved his hand and said resolutely, It's better to believe that it's true than not. Let's go. Follow me to the palace immediately. Yunyang was shocked. But, You have no choice but to enter the palace. The old marshal's expression was grim. Whether Ling Xiaozue's words were true or not, whether the pills are real or fake, and even whether the 3 pills you mentioned are medicine or poison, all of these depend on you. It's impossible for you to leave just like that. Yunyang pulled a long face. I've said that I'm not going to get involved in this matter. I'm not going to do anything about it. Sigh, I've been harmed by that old man this time. As he spoke, he was dragged out of the hall by Qiu Jianhan, a series of orders ringing in his ears. Prepare the horse. No, prepare the carriage. Enter the palace. Quick, quick, quick. Chapter 149. It was only when the palanquin was nearing the palace that the old marshal's ragged breathing finally calmed down a little. Child, I'm asking you one last time. Is this true? Qiu Jianhan looked at Yunyang seriously. We haven't entered the palace yet. There's still time. There's still room for negotiation. But once you enter the imperial palace, if you make any careless mistakes, your little life will be gone no matter what. This nephew is a popinjay, but this is a serious matter that concerns the fate of the nation. How can I lie? This is absolutely true, Yunyang said righteously. Don't mention popinjays. Qiu Jianhan looked like he was in a pinch. Whenever something happened, this fellow would pin the word popinjay on himself first, as if it was the best thing he could rely on. That was enough. Is being a popinjay so useful? Do you think this old man can't tell that you're pretending to be a popinjay? He kicked Yunyang's butt with a loud thud. Cut the nonsense. Follow your father in. With the old marshal's status, his journey to meet the emperor was unimpeded. After reporting, both of them arrived at the royal study without a hitch. His Majesty's yellow silhouette was standing in front of the Empire of Yutong's territory map, a memorial in his hand. His brows were tightly furrowed and the atmosphere was heavy. Old Qiu, you're here. Seeing Qiu Jianhan enter, His Majesty did not put on airs as usual. He sighed and began to complain. The flood of East River is wreaking havoc. Millions of people have lost their homes. Old Qiu, it looks like the situation. As he spoke, he saw that Yunyang had entered as well. He could not help being surprised and said, You're here too. Yunyang pretended to be shocked when he heard the old marshal and put on an extremely surprised expression. This, Uncle Yu? Your Majesty. This. The old marshal slapped the back of his head and said angrily, Still pretending. Speak properly. Speak properly. His Majesty guffawed and waved his hand, saying, We're not strangers, let's talk about family matters. Someone, give us a seat. Seeing the two of them sitting down, His Majesty the Emperor stood up and frowned. This flood from the east of the river. It was really unexpected. It was too sudden. There was no way to deal with it. The sudden flooding of the old Dragon River is most likely related to the series of torrential rains that occurred some time ago. The water level rose again and again until it finally caused the dam to burst. 36 districts on the other side were affected. It is truly a natural disaster. The old marshal sighed. However, to the Empire, this natural disaster is like adding snow to snow. What did the Empire's Ministry of Revenue say? Did they give any corresponding regulations? What rules can there be? It's just saying that the national treasury is empty, and even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice. His Majesty rubbed the space between his eyebrows and sighed deeply. There are only 3 million taels of silver left in the national treasury, but this was originally intended to be used as a reward for the soldiers of the eastern frontier. This also includes a lot of military pay. Just the reward alone is far from enough, not to mention anything else. The Ministry of Revenue proposed that if we want to quickly quell the flood and stabilize the people's hearts, we need to first use this portion of silver for disaster relief. We won't reward the army for now. We should first help the millions of victims. Even so, it's still a drop in the bucket. Far from enough. The old marshal's straight brows creased into a frown. He could not help saying, "Your Majesty, this can't be done. The soldiers are fighting and bleeding at the front lines, fighting for the country, dying 100 lives. If there isn't even basic compensation, or even insufficient military pay, wouldn't it disappoint the soldiers? Who would be willing to give their all on the battlefield then? Who would be willing to risk their lives? Your Majesty, please reconsider." His Majesty rubbed the space between his eyebrows again and said, "Of course I know this, but the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice now. Not only did the Ministry of Revenue say so, I can only say so as well." Qiu Jianhan's frown deepened. Looking at the emperor, he felt that something was amiss. His Majesty had always acted with an iron fist, swift and decisive. In the past, when faced with such matters, his solution was swift and decisive. He always had a way to make the entire imperial court submit. However, why was the response so weak this time? It was as if he was powerless and could only sigh helplessly. "I know that such a forceful recruitment will disappoint the soldiers, but this is an urgent matter. It's urgent to solve the flood problem. Perhaps, it's not difficult to think of a way to solve it." His Majesty rubbed the space between his brows, visibly troubled. "However, I really don't want to do this. It's too troublesome." The old marshal and his Majesty were talking. Yun Yang, on the other hand, had been observing the royal study from the moment he entered the room. As a place where his Majesty read through memorials and even gathered his close officials to discuss matters, the royal study was too ordinary. There were almost no decorations. Hence, Yun Yang had only seen 2 paintings when he first entered the room. One of them was on the wall to the left of his Majesty's chair. It was a scene of wind, cloud, thunder, lightning, water, and fire surging, and the earth churning. It looked like the atmosphere was strange, as if the heaven and earth had appeared at the same time, like the end of the world. However, Yun Yang knew that this painting represented the 9 Supremes. Its true meaning was nothing more than the 9 Supremes descending into the world and gathering in Yutong. His Majesty had actually placed a painting of the 9 Supremes here. Yun Yang could not help but feel a jolt in his heart. As for the other painting, it was behind His Majesty's chair. This painting made Yun Yang stare at it for a long time, almost unwilling to move his eyes away. The scene in the painting was obviously in the royal study. A young man stood tall with his hands behind his back, his head slightly raised as his eyes stared into the distance. This person was dressed in a bright yellow robe, embroidered with a few golden dragons bearing their fangs and claws. This caused the young man in the image to exude an air of nobility. The young man's face was gentle yet strong. His gaze was deep and brooding, as if he had seen the suffering of the people in the world. There was a clear sense of pity in his eyes. The bright yellow robe with the golden dragon's claws. This was the crown prince's uniform. Was the person in the painting the current crown prince? However, the person in the painting was clearly not the crown prince. He had seen the crown prince before, but Yun Yang was certain that he had never seen this person before. However, for some reason, Yun Yang, who had never seen this person before, felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity with him. It was as if the person had melded into his bloodline. Especially that pair of eyes. It was as if they had seen into his heart. Yun Yang felt his heartbeat quicken as he stared at the painting. His vision blurred as a sense of dizziness rose within him. A bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. Yun Yang suddenly recalled that day when he was on the brink of death. While he was unconscious, he seemed to have seen a few brothers on the road. The one leading them was the eldest, Supreme Earth. He had not worn a mask then. He had just looked at him, his gaze filled with love and compassion, as well as the doting trust he had for his brothers. Then, he had kicked Yun Yang and scolded, "Go back. Don't ever come back again." His face, his aura, his gaze, and his expression were exactly the same as the person in the painting. Eldest. Yun Yang's heart was in turmoil as the two words popped up in his mind. He felt a sharp pain in his heart. Suddenly, there was a sweet taste in his throat as he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. The old marshal and His Majesty the Emperor were discussing matters with a frown when they heard the sound beside them. Looking towards the source of the sound, it was Yun Yang spitting out a mouthful of fresh blood. Both of them were shocked. Upon closer inspection, they saw that Yun Yang's face was as white as a sheet of paper and his body was swaying. The old marshal was quick to catch him. His Majesty the Emperor was shocked as well, asking, "What's wrong with this child?" Qiu Zhenhan sighed. "This little fellow. I don't know why, but he went berserk in his cultivation a few days ago. He almost fainted and laid unconscious on the bed for a few days. He's only been able to move for a few days now. I guess his old ailment has been triggered before he could recover." His Majesty the Emperor asked with concern, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Yun Yang caught his breath and chuckled humorlessly. After cultivating to recover, he said, "Your Majesty, don't worry. It's just that my meridians were out of balance and triggered the blood clots accumulated in my body. I couldn't hold it in and dirted Your Majesty's study. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." Sigh, there's nothing wrong with being injured. His Majesty the Emperor waved his hand nonchalantly. "But you're really something. Why are you running around instead of resting at home when you're so severely injured? I'll summon the Imperial Physician to take a closer look at you later. Don't leave any lingering ailments." Yun Yang grinned. "I just can't sit still, haha." Yun Yang's churning qi and blood had been suppressed and color had returned to his pale face. Only the waves of shock in his heart had yet to calm down. It was his eldest brother's portrait. It was Supreme Earth's portrait. However, why would Supreme Earth's portrait be hung here? Furthermore, why was his eldest brother wearing the Crown Prince's robe? Yun Yang felt like the universe had exploded in his mind. He could vaguely guess what was going on, but he could not put his finger on it. Looking at His Majesty's face that was 80% similar to the one in the portrait, Yun Yang's heart was surging with emotions, unable to calm down. The old marshal glanced at Yun Yang curiously and could not help coughing when he saw that Yun Yang seemed to be in a daze. He had entered the palace today because of the information provided by this fellow. He was counting on him to speak and solve the mystery himself, but he had actually become mute at the crucial moment of entering the palace. "Your father has spent so much effort to bring you into the palace. I've even taken off my pants and you're only letting your father see this?" Yun Yang coughed and forced himself to retract his thoughts. He glanced at Qiu Zhenhan and signaled with his eyes. Qiu Zhenhan felt like his stomach was about to explode from the old marshal's glance. Did this bastard not hear a single word that he had said earlier? This old man has been wrangling here for so long and all I've done is waste a few mouthfuls of saliva. If they were not in the royal study, old Marshal Qiu felt that he would definitely press this child down, pull down his pants and spank his bottom. If his bottom was not broken, he would never be able to vent his anger. Chapter 150. Qiu Zhenhan was inwardly angry, but he could only play along with Yun Yang. Despite his discomfort, his expression turned sour. With a dark expression, he said, "Why does this old official not quite understand what Your Majesty is saying? Your Majesty is in the prime of your life. Even if you have overworked yourself with the affairs of the nation, you might feel tired for a moment, but why would you feel powerless?" His Majesty rubbed the area between his brows again and said somberly, "I've been feeling uneasy lately, unable to sleep at night." Yun Yang's eyes stared unblinkingly at the spot between the Emperor's brows. Why did His Majesty like to rub the area between his brows so much? How could he not know that the old marshal was reminding him? However, it was obvious that His Majesty had not been paying attention to anything recently. Even the wise and intelligent His Majesty did not understand the deeper meaning of the old marshal's question. He did not even notice the tone of Qiu Zhenhan's words, let alone the fact that Qiu Zhenhan did not look too good when he spoke. This was not normal at all. Yun Yang coughed and said, "Your Majesty has been rubbing the area between your brows with your hand. Do you feel that your brain is in pain?" Qiu Zhenhan turned around abruptly, his gaze trained on the spot between the Emperor's brows. As an official, it was taboo to look at the Emperor directly or at the same level. What more to focus on the Emperor's vitals? Even the closest official was no exception. However, The old marshal could not care less about this taboo now. Although he had felt that the emperor had rubbed the area between his brows a little more often, he did not think that there was anything wrong with it. After all, His Majesty had developed this habit since a few years ago. He had long forgotten when he had developed this habit. Yes, I do feel that the area between my brows is bloated. It's very uncomfortable. I feel muddle-headed all day, only wanting to sleep. However, when I really go to bed, I can't fall asleep. I keep feeling that the affairs of the nation are bothering me. It's better not to sleep. His Majesty was troubled as he continued to rub the area between his brows. It was as if the action of rubbing the space between his eyebrows had become an instinctive reaction that was not controlled by his brain. Yunyang replied, I see. Your Majesty must have been overly worried about the affairs of the nation and overworked yourself. Adding these two factors together, it's inevitable that you'll suffer too much. However, Your Majesty's massage may not have any effect. This nephew has learned some relaxation techniques from a stranger. How about this nephew be bold enough to massage Your Majesty? As he spoke, he winked at old Marshal Qiu. Qiu Jianhan understood and said, It's rare for this child to have such filial piety. Your Majesty, why don't you let him try? This is probably a junior of your nephew's generation who can show some filial piety. How could the body of His Majesty the Emperor be touched by just anyone? Not to mention the head. If there was even the slightest mistake, then it would definitely be a monstrous disaster, a disaster that could wipe out the entire clan. It could be said that Qiu Jianhan was taking a huge risk by saying this. If Yunyang really had second thoughts, not only would Yunyang himself be implicated after today, he, the person who had spoken up to persuade him, would also be implicated. By then, his entire family would be executed without a doubt. Very well. His Majesty the Emperor put down his hand and closed his eyes tiredly, slumping down on the chair. Yunyang walked to his back and extended his fingers, gently placing his left and right index fingers on both sides of His Majesty's temples. The endless divine art began to circulate quietly. Qiu Jianhan stood upright and leaned forward slightly, his eyes staring at Yunyang's hand without blinking. If Yunyang made any strange movements, the old marshal would definitely kill him without hesitation. Although he trusted Yunyang 100%, he was still on tenterhooks. Yunyang's endless divine art had only circulated one round in the Emperor's meridians before his expression grew increasingly grim. Looking at Yunyang's expression, the old marshal's heart sank as well. When Yunyang retracted his fingers, His Majesty the Emperor had already fallen into a deep slumber. Perhaps this was the only high-quality afternoon nap that the monarch of a country had had in the past few years. How is it? The old marshal asked anxiously. It's exactly as Ling Xiaozue said. Yunyang sucked in a deep breath. His Majesty's current physical condition is already very bad. The main reason should be the consumption of one or a few strange poisons over the years. Otherwise, how could it have caused such a disorder in his meridians? His Majesty's cultivation base has progressed and his mystical qi hasn't been drained at all. It's all stored deep within his dantian. Perhaps this is the main reason why His Majesty doesn't think much of it. What he doesn't know is that although mystical qi can still flow through his meridians, they're already riddled with holes and broken into pieces. Such a situation is manifested in a state where even he himself won't notice it. However, once the poison accumulates to the point of eruption, or when he suddenly fights the enemy, his meridians will break inch by inch because they can't bear the burden. His body will then die immediately because his mystical qi has nowhere to vent. Yunyang's voice was heavy. As for the discomfort between his brows, it's the only external manifestation of the poison. However, this manifestation also means that the poison is slowly invading His Majesty's brain. The old marshal's eyes widened as he listened. Is it that serious? Yunyang sighed. The poison was invading the brain. Even though the old marshal was not versed in the art of poison, he was still frightened by what he heard. His Majesty's action of rubbing the area between his brows had started a few years ago. Just thinking about how far the poison had gone after such a long period of time sent chills down his spine. Can he still be saved? The old marshal's voice was trembling as he uttered these words. What we can do now is to do our best and leave it to fate. Yunyang said, I've checked on His Majesty's internal condition just now. It's not optimistic at all. The 3 pills left by Ling Xiaozue, even if their spiritual medicine can only alleviate the poison temporarily. It's impossible to cure it completely. The old marshal's gaze was sorrowful. For a moment, he was speechless. He did not even have the time to feel anger. He could only feel an indescribable sorrow, fear, and heartache. Such a wise emperor who had worked so hard for the country and its people, the emperor of Yutong who had worked so hard for the country and its people, had been poisoned silently for years in his own palace. It was horrifying to think about it. The cultivation method I'm cultivating is different. It helps to expel the poison and recover. Yun Yong gritted his teeth. But I can't enter the palace often. If Old Marshal can think of a way to send His Majesty to the residence of Yun or the residence of Marshal every half a month, I can come and help with the cleansing with my mystical qi. Together with the 3 spiritual medicines, there might still be a sliver of hope. Yun Yang's words were not meant to ease the old marshal's heart. When he was inspecting His Majesty just now, Yun Yang had unexpectedly realized that his endless divine art was like a nemesis to the unknown poison. Wherever the endless divine art's energy was channeled to, the poison there would automatically avoid it. As for the parts that could not be avoided, they would be completely eliminated, just like pouring boiling soup on snow. However, no matter how miraculous the endless divine art was, the poison in His Majesty's body had already spread throughout his meridians. With only 1 or 2 cleansing sessions, even if Yun Yang's divine art cultivation base were to increase by another level, it would still be a drop in the bucket. It would not help the situation at all. Right now, he could only pin his hopes on more cleansing sessions and the vitality provided by Emmy. Only then would there be a sliver of hope to remove the poison. Old Marshal Chou's eyes shone. It's great that there's a way. Leave these matters to this old man. You just have to help with the treatment. Yun Yang said, Yun Yang is duty-bound to do this, but I still have to pay attention to His Majesty's meals and living environment in the future. Although I can't be sure if the poison that is harming His Majesty originates from the food or some common item, I can't let the unknown poison continue to harm His Majesty. Otherwise, there's no cure to speak of. Chou Zhenhan's eyes glinted coldly. This must be the conspiracy of the traitor. It must be eliminated as soon as possible. Yun Yang was shocked. This can't be done like this. Chou Zhenhan frowned, his expression fierce. Why? Are we going to let the traitor do as he pleases? Yun Yang chuckled bitterly. Capturing the culprit directly and asking him to hand over the antidote would solve the problem once and for all. However, this method is out of the question. It's something we can only hope for but not achieve. Why not? The old man's temper flared as he glared at Yun Yang. Think about it, Old Marshal. The traitor can poison the palace and do it secretly for so many years without being discovered. What does this mean? What does it mean? Yun Yang said, this in itself is an extremely terrifying thing. Firstly, the person who can poison the palace must be an expert among experts. Secondly, there must be someone behind this. Thirdly, the country is in a crisis now. It can't withstand such turmoil. His Majesty's body can't withstand such turmoil as well. Yun Yang chuckled bitterly. I only have one question for Old Marshal. If, and I'm only saying if, the mastermind behind this is His Highness the Crown Prince, what will Old Marshal do? If Her Majesty is found to be the culprit, what will Old Marshal do? Old Marshal Chiu was dumbstruck, obviously stunned by Yun Yang's bold speculation. Old Marshal, do you know how many people around His Highness the Crown Prince is advising him? Do you know how many forces are involved in this? Do you know how large of an interest group it is that surrounds the Crown Prince? As for Her Majesty the Empress or the concubines in the palace, how large of an interest group do they have around them? What's more, if the expert who poisoned the palace is found and he's an unparalleled expert who is unrivaled, what should we do? Ling Xiaozue can enter and exit Yutong's palace so easily. Isn't it because of his profound cultivation base that he's unparalleled in the world? Chapter 151. There will be 6 updates today. Please support me. All my sincerity is in the update. Asking for monthly votes. Chapter 152. Old Marshal Chiu was silent for a moment before he suddenly heaved a long sigh towards the sky. The feeling of being powerless and powerless, even though he seemed to have the strength to do so, had almost caused this invincible marshal who had fought his entire life to break down instantly. It was true that he could not do it now. If this matter were to be exposed, the empire of Yutong would be torn apart immediately. Yun Yang's words were vague, but how could the old marshal, who was experienced in the ways of the world, not hear the underlying meaning? What did it mean to be able to poison the emperor in a place like the palace for so many years without anyone noticing? What did it mean? It was indeed terrifying to think about it. The old marshal sat aside in silence, his teeth chattering, hating the heavens for being blind and the earth for not having a handle. After a long time, His Majesty slowly woke up. His first instinct when he opened his eyes was to raise his hand to rub the space between his brows. However, he stopped abruptly as his eyes shone brightly. His eyes stared straight at Yun Yang, exuding an expression of extreme joy. Yun Yang, your massage technique is amazing. I don't feel as uncomfortable anymore. Besides, I had a good sleep just now. I feel like my mind is much clearer. This is probably the best sleep I've had recently. Yun Yang smiled and said, If your Majesty likes it, this nephew can nurse your Majesty's body at any time. It's my duty. Haha. His Majesty laughed heartily and nodded. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you. The old marshal's expression was grim as he said, Yun Yang, this has nothing to do with you now. This old man will have someone send you out of the palace. This old man still has something to discuss with His Majesty. Yun Yang knew that what the old marshal was about to discuss with His Majesty was a matter that could shake the nation. It was obviously inappropriate for him to sit here. Besides, it was also the old marshal's intention to protect him. He stood up immediately and said, This nephew shall take his leave then. Farewell, your Majesty. His Majesty looked at Yun Yang with admiration and said, Very well. Come to the palace often when you're free in the future. I'm lonely sometimes. Yes, your Majesty. Yun Yang agreed. When he retreated to the door, he could not help but ask, May I ask your Majesty if the portrait behind your Majesty is of your Majesty when you were young? He's so handsome. The Emperor abruptly closed his eyes and felt a piercing pain suddenly rise from his heart. His rosy face suddenly turned pale. Qiu Jianhong bellowed, How dare you? Do you think the things in His Majesty's study are something you can simply ask about? As he fumed, he shot Yun Yang a meaningful look. His Majesty closed his eyes, waved his hand and said in a deep voice, It's all right, it's all right. The person in the portrait is my. His Majesty's voice was hoarse, but he did not continue. He said in a low voice, Go. Take care, your Majesty, Yun Yang said with a lowered head. He retreated. Even when Yun Yang had left the palace, His Majesty was still standing in a daze, feeling waves of heartache. Just now, when Yun Yang left, he had told His Majesty to take care. It had sent waves of emotions through the Emperor's heart. He could hear the sincerity in these words. However, it was this sincerity that immediately reminded His Majesty of his eldest son, Supreme Earth. When the latter was on his last mission, the latter had knelt before him and said, Father, take care. The deep affection and attachment when he said those words. This child only looks like a person, but his mind is very simple. He's really not very sensible. Old Marshal Qiu coughed and said, I'll teach him a good lesson when we get back. His Majesty waved his hand and stopped the old marshal's words, saying seriously, Old Qiu, this is a good child. His Majesty's Adam's apple bobbed as he uttered word by word in a low voice. Good child. Good child. These 3 words were what he had always wanted to say to his son who was Supreme Earth, but until his son's death, he had not been able to say it. But now, he was finally able to say these 3 words. At this moment, the bitterness and sorrow in His Majesty's heart had almost formed an ocean. My child is the best of the best. The person in the portrait is my. Although His Majesty did not finish his words, Yun Yang understood everything. He felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck his head. His gaze towards His Majesty had turned cordial as well. This was his eldest son's father. That was why he couldn't help but say, Take care, your Majesty. Even when he was on his way out of the palace, Yun Yang still felt dizzy. Just as Yun Yang stepped out of the palace, he saw a person standing in front of him. His scattered thoughts gathered abruptly. Young Master Yun is too kind. The person in front of him was someone he had met once before. Han Wufei from the Crown Prince's residence. Yun Yang glanced at him and frowned, saying faintly, I remember your name. Han Wufei, the advisor of the Crown Prince's residence, am I right? What's the matter? Han Wufei answered politely. This lowly one is here on the Crown Prince's order to invite young Master Yun over for a chat. Yun Yang said, I've never met His Highness the Crown Prince. Why is he looking for me? Han Wufei was impatient when he heard him and said, Of course His Highness the Crown Prince has something to discuss with young Master Yun. He did not have a good impression of Yun Yang to begin with. Now that he heard this fellow grumbling about the Crown Prince's invitation, he was infuriated. Yun Yang's gaze turned cold as he said coldly, The Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage has never been involved in politics. I myself am an idle man, a popinjay. What can His Highness the Crown Prince have to discuss with me? It's futile and useless. What's the point of meeting me? Yun Yang had made his stance clear, making it clear that he did not want to be involved in the prince's fight for the throne. The Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage was indeed superior, almost above all the other nobles. Logically speaking, Han Wufei should have given up and turned to leave. Han Wufei said faintly, Young Master Yun's words are wrong. His Highness the Crown Prince is the monarch. We are his subjects. How can we not obey His Highness the Crown Prince's summons? Young Master Yun, please make the trip quickly and don't make a mistake. It was obvious that Han Wufei was determined to make Yun Yang meet the Crown Prince. It was also hinting that he would force Yun Yang to do so no matter the cost. Looking at Han Wufei's overbearing attitude, Yun Yang suddenly wore an eerie smile. Han Wufei was confused. Why was this fellow smiling? What was he smiling at? Then, he heard Yun Yang cry out abruptly. What kind of logic is this? You're going to kill me if I don't go? Didn't I say that the Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage doesn't involve itself in politics? Yun Yang cried out in shock, his round eyes staring at Han Wufei in rage. Is this a threat? Did His Highness the Crown Prince ask you to threaten me like this? You're going to kill me if I don't go? How can there be such logic in this world? They were near the palace's entrance. While there were no idlers, there were plenty of high officials and officials coming and going. There were also hundreds of guards guarding the palace gate, both openly and covertly. Yun Yang's loud voice reached these people's ears instantly. In an instant, everyone turned around in shock, unable to believe what they had just heard. Politics? The Crown Prince was forcing the Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage? Han Wufei was enraged, but he quickly lowered his voice and said irritably, Yun Yang, what nonsense are you spouting? Hurry up and shut up. Yun Yang's voice grew louder. Why do you want me to shut up? Why do you want me to shut up? I'm the only son of the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, the next Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. Can't I call for help when I meet a bad guy and am in danger? All of you are going to kill me and you're not even letting me speak? Can't all of you be reasonable? Is the Crown Prince's residence so overbearing? There was no lack of experts among the crowd. Han Wufei had purposely lowered his voice, so not many people had heard what he had said earlier. However, after Yun Yang's sudden shout, they had turned their attention to him immediately, listening to every single movement that had taken place. As for Han Wufei's last sentence, his voice was even softer, but there were already many who had noticed the commotion here. Naturally, many of them had heard him clearly as well. Don't spout nonsense. These people linked the conversation between the two of them and quickly came to a conclusion. They snorted inwardly. You've already threatened him so much and you're still asking him not to speak nonsense. What kind of logic is this to ask him to shut up? The aides of the Crown Prince's residence are indeed overbearing. The gazes from the crowd were like arrows that had been shot at him. Han Wufei looked flustered as he said angrily, Nonsense! When did I threaten you? Yun Yang smirked. Why are you angry now? Do you want to fight me? Han Wufei was enraged as he said loudly, Speak clearly. When have I, Han Wufei, ever threatened you? This matter is detrimental to His Highness's reputation. I have to make it clear to you no matter what. Yun Yang said, May I ask why His Highness is looking for me? For an idler, a popinjay like me? Han Wufei could not help feeling flustered as he looked at the people around him who had their ears perked up. How would I know why His Highness is looking for you? How can we, your subordinates, interfere with His Highness's matters and actions? I've just come out of the palace and His Highness is looking for me. What is it for? I've made my stand clear just now and I can let you report on your mission. Why must I go? Yun Yang asked again. His Highness has great foresight. What he wants to do is important. How can I speculate? The only thing I can do is to complete the task the Crown Prince has entrusted to me, not to report on my mission. Han Wufei snorted coldly. Does this mean that His Highness is looking for me to discuss important matters when I've just come out of the palace? If I hadn't entered the palace, His Highness wouldn't be looking for me to discuss important matters, am I right? Yun Yang continued to steer the topic of conversation towards a place that was miles away from the main topic. The topic was too sensitive. Han Wufei's mouth was parched as he mulled over his words. He was drenched in sweat as he tried his best to reply. His Highness only wants to invite young Master Yun over for a discussion. Even if young Master Yun didn't enter the palace, he would. I, Yun Yang, have been in Tiantang City for so many years. His Highness hasn't looked for me to discuss anything before, but now he's looking for me to discuss something once I've entered the palace? May I ask what is it about? Other than today's matter, what else does it have to do with an idler like me, a popinjay? Yun Yang refused to budge, keeping the words I entered the palace, I'm an idler, I'm a popinjay, at the edge of his mouth. Chapter 153. The more the onlookers listened, the weirder their expressions became. Indeed, if the fact that he had just entered the palace aside, it seemed that this young Master Yun was only known as an idler or a popinjay. What was there to discuss with him? It was indeed intriguing and suspicious. There could only be one reason for a person of high status to discuss with a popinjay. The power behind the popinjay. Han Wufei's expression changed gradually. He realized that if he continued to linger on this topic, Yun Yang might end up saying that His Highness the Crown Prince was plotting a rebellion. Young Master Yun, why do you have to quibble like this? This concerns His Highness the Crown Prince's reputation. Don't make a mistake. Han Wufei hollered coldly. Don't make a mistake? Is there a new threat? May I ask, if His Highness the Crown Prince had not sent you to find me right after I came out of the palace, how would I have quibbled? Yun Yang smirked. Now that you've come to me and threatened me, forcing me to submit and forbidding me to speak, I'll be quibbling as long as I open my mouth to refute. Is that right? Yes, as long as I defend myself, I'll tarnish the Crown Prince's reputation. I can't refute this. It's too reasonable. Han Wufei was seething with anger as he gritted his teeth and said, A bite from a thief goes deep into the bone. Yun Yang was shocked. Now I've become a thief? Even if I did bite you, may I ask, if you didn't come to me, how would I let you go deep into the bone? Han Wufei wanted to curse His Highness the Crown Prince's sincerity. Yun Yang continued to be surprised. Threatening me with sincerity? Such sincerity is truly sincere. Han Wufei could not take it anymore. Shut up. Yun Yang, if you say another word, this reputed one will. What will this reputed one do to me? Yun Yang cut him off angrily. Do you dare kill me? Han Wufei's anger surged. Do you think I don't dare? His tone was chilling. It was obvious that his killing intent had been triggered. Yun Yang chuckled. You're threatening me again. This time, you're threatening me with death. If I don't submit, it looks like my life will be in danger. The topic had gone one round and was back to the threat. Han Wufei's head was spinning with rage. When did I ever threaten you? Don't spout nonsense. This concerns the Crown Prince's reputation. Don't make a mistake. Shoo! There were boos all around. Many looked at Han Wufei like they were looking at an idiot. You were so loud just now that you wanted to kill him, and you actually said, When did I ever threaten you? Are you sure you care about the Crown Prince's reputation? Your actions are clearly tarnishing the Crown Prince's reputation. Holy shit. This person was truly of the highest quality. I think he's the one who shouldn't be mistaken. Han Wufei was an experienced man as well. He reacted quickly and blurted out, But I didn't threaten you just now. Yun Yang did not know whether to laugh or cry. Then tell me, what do you really want? Han Wufei said angrily, His Highness the Crown Prince asked me to invite you. Yun Yang was exasperated. Ha! Is this how your family invites people? The surrounding people all had strange looks in their eyes. His Highness the Crown Prince actually sent such a person to invite people. This is really... Was he going to invite someone or offend someone? Han Wufei's mind was a mess. Yun Yang looked at him sympathetically. Go back. First, I won't go. Second, you're not qualified to invite me like this with your status. I, Yun Yang, am the descendant of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds after all. How can I be ordered around like this? Third, you've been threatening me since the beginning. I don't know if it's your intention or the Crown Prince's. If it's your intention, ask His Highness the Crown Prince to send someone else to invite me. If it's His Highness the Crown Prince's intention, how would I dare go? Also, Marquis Yun's family has never been involved in the imperial court's affairs. In conclusion, please go back. Yun Yang smiled faintly and turned to leave. Han Wufei yelled angrily, Yun Yang! However, Yun Yang did not even turn his head back as he walked further away. The expressions on the faces of the people around them were extremely interesting. He really didn't expect to see such a big show today. It should be a drama of one party oppressing the other. It was a classic. Yun Yang's footsteps were unusually light as he strolled home. From the beginning to the end, he had never thought of going against the Crown Prince. Han Wufei had said it very well. The Crown Prince was the monarch while the rest were all subjects. If it was not necessary, Yun Yang did not want to be enemies with the country's heir. Once he did so, the commotion would be huge and could possibly shake the nation's foundation. This was not something the Nine Supremes would like to see, and it was even more impossible for him to do so given the Empire of Yutong's current situation. In spite of this, Yun Yang's current action was to make the situation even more confusing. Since the Crown Prince had sent Han Wufei over, he could use him as an example. Those who had heard the drama in front of the palace were not ordinary people. Yun Yang's actions would definitely draw everyone's attention to the Crown Prince. At least in the short term, His Highness would have to think twice before doing anything. This was only the start of a whirlpool. That night, Yun Yang turned into a breeze and entered the third prince's residence. He tossed in a set of fake documents that he had prepared beforehand. The Crown Prince is plotting a rebellion. The evidence is conclusive. The following is. Very soon, the third prince's residence was heavily guarded for the entire night. All the strategists went in and out, plotting and discussing. Then, Yun Yang went to the fourth prince's residence, placing a set of confidential documents on the table in the fourth prince's study. OL third and OL fifth have already worked together, plotting to get rid of His Highness first before working together to deal with the Crown Prince. The evidence is inside. Yun Yang did not let the fifth prince's residence go either. The fifth prince's residence had caught on fire in the latter half of the night, but Yun Yang had snuck in and set it ablaze. The fire was intense, the crimson light shooting into the sky, almost dyeing half of the capital city's night sky red. After that, the residence of Grand Commandant, residence of Grand Tutor, residence of King Jing, and other residences had all received different things. A few of them had been set ablaze as well. The entire capital city was in chaos as people screamed and horses neighed. Finally, Yun Yang made a trip to the residence of He. Since he had gone to all the other places, this place was even more so. Old He Hanqing, was meditating in the secret chamber. Around him were piles of mystical crystals that seemed to have been set up in a mystical formation, hoping to extract energy from the mystical crystals to heal his wounds. Old He had yet to recover from his injuries and could no longer use high-level mystical chi to heal himself, so he could only heal himself with this method. As someone who liked to play tricks, he was also wary of others plotting against him. He was used to putting himself in the most dangerous position to think from another's point of view. Naturally, he dared not cultivate to heal himself outside. If he was ambushed, even if the other party could not attack him, it would only disrupt his healing process or ignite his anger, or even move his mystical chi. It would all lead to a terrifying and dangerous outcome. However, his careful action of not healing himself outside had made things more convenient for Yun Yang. Yun Yang turned into a gentle breeze in the residence of He, drifting around in search of something. However, Yun Yang was surprised to find that there was nothing illegal in Old He's residence, no matter where he looked. To be more precise, there wasn't even the slightest bit of sensitivity. Even his study room had nothing other than a few paintings and calligraphy hanging on the wall. Not only was there no book, there was not even his own handwriting. Yun Yang searched through all the buildings in the residence of He in disbelief. There was nothing, no belongings, no treasures, and none of the above. He searched the ground to no avail. There was also the secret chamber underground. However, even though Yun Yang had turned into the wind and his cultivation base had improved tremendously, he still dared not enter Old He's secret chamber. This was because there were 8 vaguely powerful auras surrounding He Hanqing's secret chamber, hovering and hidden. Each of these 8 auras was no weaker than Mi Kongquan's. There were even a few of them that were much stronger than Mi Kongquan's. Although he knew that He Hanqing's secret was underground, Yun Yang dared not go down. How could Yun Yang be willing to leave just like that? He was infuriated. Your father is missing your bastard nest. If I can't kill the old bastard, I'll kill the young bastard and his underlings first. Therefore, in the middle of the night, Old He's residence was abruptly engulfed in flames without any warning. This fire was different from the previous ones. Almost as soon as it started to burn, the entire residence was already on fire. The flames soared 1,000 feet into the sky. When the flames rose, it was already proven that this fire could not be extinguished, unless it was burned to ashes. He Hanqing was recuperating in the secret chamber when the experts on guard suddenly felt something, and one of them swiftly drifted out. Then, he returned with an ugly expression. The residence of He is on fire. 2 men were left to guard while the other 6 went out together. When they went out, they saw the raging fire outside. A ball of flame seemed to have a life of its own as it rolled back and forth in the residence of He excitedly. Wherever it went, there was a blaze. A few of them charged forward with a shout, dispersing the flame with a single strike. However, there was nothing left after the flame had dispersed. A gust of wind blew past, leaving no trace behind. Then, a strong wind howled in the air. The wind fueled the fire, and even the ground of the residence of He was on fire. A few of them entered the secret chamber with an ugly expression. The fire on the ground could no longer be contained. After a while, when the fire was almost extinguished, they forcefully extinguished it with mystical qi. However, the entire residence of He had already turned into ashes. None of the family members in the residence had escaped. All of them had been burned to ashes. At this moment, a name suddenly rose in the hearts of all the guards. Supreme Flame. Could it be that the fire elf was not dead? In the formation, He Hanqing's expression changed. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood. In the formation, hundreds of mystical crystals turned into powder with a crack. He Hanqing's face was pale. Just now, his emotions were unstable and he almost went berserk. Not only did his internal injuries not lessen, they worsened instead. He Hanqing's family members were still on the ground. At this moment, they were all buried in the fire. Not a single one was left. Supreme Flame. He Hanqing spat out 2 words weakly. This old man and you will never be able to coexist. The 8 of them looked at each other. Supreme Flame was really not dead? Besides, you almost killed all of his brothers. It goes without saying that you will never be able to coexist. The careful search almost exhausted Yun Yang to the point of collapsing. In spite of this, he was filled with admiration. It was the first time in his life that he had seen a bad guy like He Hanqing who left no traces behind. It was too clean. Everything was impeccably tidied up. Yun Yang was still puzzled on his way back. Chapter 154. Yun Yang was extremely puzzled. The 8 auras in He Hanqing's residence represented 8 top-notch experts with high cultivation base. Such a lineup of 8 experts had never appeared before. Even when Ling Xiaozue came, these 8 people should not have been there. If they were, they would definitely interfere in the battle. With the 8 of them as support, even if Ling Xiaozue could still emerge victorious, the battle might not be as one-sided as before. So the question was, when did these 8 people arrive? Yun Yang recalled the intelligence he had received from the 9 Heavens dictum. There had been plenty of martial world people who had come to Tiantang City recently, but there had been no news of them after they entered the city. It looks like after He Hanqing was injured, he knew that someone would definitely seize this opportunity to take his life, so he hurriedly mobilized the 4 Seasons Tower's forces. Firstly, it's to protect his own safety, and secondly, it's also a deadly trap for those who are tempted to make a move. With these 8 people here, even if Marquis Yun and Old Dugu were to come personally, they would only end up dying on the spot. What a great way to beat him at his own game, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. He is indeed meticulous. Yun Yang chuckled bitterly. He was the one who was tempted to make a move. He Hanqing had been half crippled by Ling Xiaozue, with 80% of his cultivation base restrained. It was undoubtedly a godsend opportunity to kill him, but who would have thought that Han Qing would turn this fatal flaw into a flawless, fatal trap in the blink of an eye? If he had not made this trip today and arranged for someone to make a move, or rather, he would have fallen into this fatal trap. This old fox is truly cunning. Yun Yang gritted his teeth in hatred, but the admiration in his heart was genuine. With such foresight and careful planning, he was indeed the backbone of the Four Seasons Tower. Supreme Lord Spring Frost lived up to his reputation. Yun Yang left the residence of He and was halfway there. Suddenly, a sense of alarm rose within him. With a single thought, he melted into the air. Almost at the same time, the sound of clothes fluttering in the air could be heard. A white silhouette flitted over 100 feet in front of him like a bolt of lightning. The speed of its movement turned the air in its path into a vacuum zone. It was a white whirlwind. As this person flew past, a gloomy and terrifying aura also flew over from afar. In the night sky, a person dressed in linen robes and a tall crown appeared abruptly. Following the appearance of this person, Yun Yang felt the boundless space in front of him abruptly become filled with eerie winds and ghostly cries. It was as if there were countless vengeful spirits baring their fangs and claws in the air, pouncing on him. This person's body flashed in the air and then disappeared. The chilly wind behind him was heading in the direction that the man had fled to. There was not the slightest mistake. Behind that person, boundless chilly winds howled and chased after him. It was as if once this person moved, there would be an army of thousands and tens of thousands of ghosts behind him at any moment. It was a full quarter of an hour after this person had disappeared that Yun Yang felt the eerie aura around him slowly dissipate. What a terrifying person! Yun Yang slowly materialized at the corner of the wall and sucked in a cold breath. This person must be First Court King Qingguang, one of the 10 lords of the Hall of Dark Azura who came to Tiantang City out of the blue and found Feng Mafei out of the blue. So he didn't come without a reason. The main reason is to hunt someone down. Yun Yang's curiosity was piqued. From what he had seen just now, the person that this First Court King Qingguang was chasing after was definitely not someone to be trifled with. At the very least, he had to be at the 9th peak pinnacle level of Marquis Yun. Otherwise, it would not be up to a hall lord like King Qingguang to personally make a move. Moreover, it was a fruitless pursuit for tens of thousands of miles. If this person were to fight face to face, he would definitely not be First Court King Qingguang's opponent. However, his speed of escape is astounding, even above King Qingguang's. Although it was only a glimpse, I can still tell that he managed to catch up to King Qingguang's pace for 3 breaths. For an expert like this, the distance of 3 breaths must be no less than 10,000 feet. Looking at the situation, although he's not First Court King Qingguang's opponent, it won't be an easy task for First Court King Qingguang to catch up and kill this person. It might even be impossible. This will be a long and exhausting chase. A contest of time, endurance and confidence. It's just that. It's rare to see such an unparalleled expert in Tiantang City, even if there's only one of them. Why have they appeared in such a group now? Yun Yang shook his head with a bitter smile, seeing that the current situation was getting more and more complicated. Still, this person that First Court King Qingguang is chasing after is quite a character. Being hunted by such a strong enemy, he's actually wearing the white robe that is most taboo for nightwalkers. It's like he's afraid that others won't be able to see him. Yun Yang returned to the residence of Yun. Feng Mafei and Lao Mei were in the midst of their cultivation. 2 powerful auras were circling in the residence of Yun, growing and expanding. Yun Yang did not interrupt them and returned to his room. Right now, he needed to think about it carefully. Tiantang City had slowly turned from an orderly state to a chaotic mess. It was unprecedentedly noisy and chaotic. All sorts of powerful martial world figures and rare mysterious experts had appeared. There were also famed generals from various empires who were about to arrive. Yun Yang could vaguely feel that Tiantang City would inevitably become the center of the world's storm. It was unavoidable, unavoidable. After a few more days, such a trend would only grow more terrifying and terrifying. Yun Yang calculated in his heart. The 4 noble families had placed the 4 noble young masters here, so more experts would definitely come. The incident with Mi Kongquan in the palace seemed to have ended, but it was not. He Hanqing would not let the matter rest either. The king of the Dark Azura Hall was here, and the merciless tower had tried to assassinate him some time ago. Someone should be coming as well. Then, there would be the civil and military officials attacking each other and the military generals being wronged. The old marshal would not sit idly by, but as long as His Majesty the Emperor recovered, there would be a way out. Speaking of His Majesty the Emperor, he had to talk about the mysterious poison in his body. It was the most important thing now, the origin of the incident that would explode. However, as long as Yun Yang helped him recuperate, there would be no worries. Now that Tai Zheng's wedding was imminent, the famed generals from various empires would arrive one after another. With the arrival of these people, martial artists from various empires would also gather in Tiantang City. By then, one could only imagine how chaotic Tiantang City would be. With so many things happening at the same time, Yun Yang would never believe that there was no mastermind behind all this. In spite of this, Yun Yang had to take care of Yun Zuyu as well. The people sent by the Nine Heavens dictum to search for Ji Ling, and the rest had yet to receive any news. None of these incidents seemed to be directly related to Yun Yang, but all of them were directly or indirectly related to the Nine Supremes. Most importantly, Yun Yang's ability was still weak. If he wanted to take advantage of the situation and turn the situation around, he would need to strike a balance from both sides. Speaking of which, the greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. I don't have much power now, but I have too many things to handle. How can I not borrow strength and influence to cope? Yun Yang sighed. Tens of thousands of miles away. Ji Ling, or rather, Ji Lingxi was toying with the treasured saber, Phoenix's Cry. The more she held it in her hand, the more she felt that the saber was connected to her flesh and blood, as if it was a part of her. Furthermore, it was a part of her that possessed a certain spirituality. A few nights ago, when Ji Lingxi was ambushed, the treasured saber, Phoenix's Cry, had actually emitted a clear saber chime to warn her of the impending mishap. Although they were already prepared for this incident and were aware of the enemy's attack, the Phoenix's Cry's unique characteristic made Ji Lingxi even more reluctant to part with it. Holding Phoenix's Cry in her hand, she naturally thought of the person who had given her the treasured saber. Lingxi, you seem to have changed a lot these few days. Yu Xiang'er, who was standing beside her, stared at Ji Lingxi with some envy. Ha! Have I changed? How have I changed? Nonsense! Ji Lingxi was a little flustered, startled out of her contemplation. Naturally, she felt a little guilty. You know very well whether I've changed or not. What are you feeling guilty about if I haven't changed? Xia Yuhan, who was standing beside her, teased. You've become quiet. When you're free, you're hugging the saber and thinking about something. It's like you're hugging your lover. What an eyesore. Yuhan. Ji Lingxi's face flushed as she stomped her feet in exasperation. Oh, you're blushing. Why are you blushing? I didn't say who it was, nor did I mention a name. Xia Yuhan pouted, her eyes filled with mischief. Humph. Ji Lingxi turned her head away, ignoring her. However, Yu Xiang'er was relentless. Lingxi, your face now, your skin now. Why is it so good? She grabbed Ji Lingxi's hand and exclaimed, Why is your hand so soft? Let me see. Oh my God, the marks from your cultivation are all gone. What's going on? Tell me quickly. Yu Xiang'er's eyes shone as she looked at Ji Lingxi, drooling with desire. Among her sisters, Yu Xiang'er paid the most attention to her appearance. She had been paying attention to Ji Lingxi's changes for a long time, but she could not stand it anymore. Women who practiced martial arts, no matter how they took care of themselves, would always have some marks on their hands. Unless their cultivation had reached the connate realm and cleansed their meridians and marrow, only then would their bodies have such scars, calluses, and dead skin fall off. Otherwise, it was almost impossible for such a situation to occur. Ji Lingxier's mystical qi cultivation base was obviously far from that realm, but the truth was that all the marks accumulated from cultivation on her body had really disappeared, leaving not a single trace behind. This was driving Yu Xiang'er, who valued beauty more than her life, crazy. Gone? Ji Lingxi looked at herself, a little lost. Chapter 155. Sometimes, the person in question would be the slowest to react. Take Ji Lingxi for example. She really did not realize that she was different from the others. Yu Xiang'er dashed over and grabbed Ji Lingxi's arm. She rolled up her sleeves and did the same with her own sleeves. Suddenly she cried out in agony. Look! This girl must have a good idea. Look at how tender her arm is. It's so smooth and supple. The sisters gathered around her upon hearing her, their eyes wide and small as they observed, exclaiming, "Indeed, there's a tinge of red in the white. This is too tender." Xueqi was not the only one who could resist the temptation of flawless beauty, snow-white skin, and jade-like bones. "I've bathed with Lingxi before," Xueqi said plaintively. Her breasts weren't as big as mine, and her skin wasn't as fair as mine. Now, her breasts are bigger than mine, and her skin is fairer than mine. She's taller than me to begin with. She's going to crush me in all aspects. Oh God, I don't want to live anymore. The other sisters looked at Lingxi curiously as well, gathering around her. "Lingxi, tell us honestly, what kind of trick did you use? Hand it over and share it with us sisters. Otherwise, we won't let you go." Yes, be honest, or we'll torture you together." Lingxi was bewildered as she asked, "Have I really changed? I really didn't notice. Haven't I always? How can you say that you haven't changed when it's so obvious? Are you trying to fool a fool?" The sisters were indignant. Lingxi, on the other hand, was confused, not knowing what to do. She really did not remember any special encounter. It was just that she had been in a good mood every time she held this saber during this period of time. There was really nothing else. "Then tell me, when did I start to change?" Lingxi asked in a daze. Xueqi remembered it vividly as she replied immediately. "It hadn't even been 2 to 3 days since you left Tiantang City, and you'd already started to shed your skin. You were still complaining about how there was so much dander on your body then." Humph. With that, everyone suddenly remembered. "That's right, Lingxi, you did complain about it for the past few days. Skin flakes kept falling off your body, and we even comforted you." Lingxi recalled it as well, but she was even more bewildered. "But what is going on? I didn't have any fortuitous encounters. Everyone basically stayed together every day." Xueqi frowned as well, thinking hard. Suddenly a thought struck her. Could it be that Lingxi has already done that in Tiantang City? All the sisters asked in unison. "Which what?" Xueqi blushed as she said. Was nourished by that young Master Yun?" This sudden statement was earth-shattering. In an instant, all the girls blushed. However, they were all sisters here, so there was less restraint in their words. Xia Yuhan slapped her thigh and said, "That must be the case. It's said that women who are nourished are the most outstanding. Lingxi, be honest. Have you given yourself to him?" Lingxi was both embarrassed, almost crying out loud. Her face was flushed. No, I didn't sigh." As she spoke, she sighed and said, "It's not like all of you don't know that he's just a piece of wood." Her sigh was laced with sorrow. "Oh, looks like this girl is rather disappointed that she didn't give herself up." Xueqi pursed her lips and put her hands on her hips. "Be honest. What actually happened?" Rulan did not speak. However, her eyes were staring at Lingxi's face thoughtfully and then at the Phoenix's Cry saber in Lingxi's hand. Ever since they left Tiantang City, the saber had not left her hand. She said thoughtfully, "Lingxi, let me have a look at your saber." Hearing Rulan's words, all the girls were intelligent and knowledgeable, so they immediately thought of something odd. Could it be that there's something strange about this saber? Lingxi hesitated. It was not that she was reluctant, but she was not used to having her hand leave her saber. She had been hugging it every day for the past few days, and it had become a habit of never leaving her side. Just as Rulan took the saber, the Phoenix's Cry saber trembled violently. She was so shocked that she almost lost her grip on the saber. Rulan cried out in surprise and lifted her head to look at Lingxi. "Lingxi, that young Master Yun of yours is really generous." Lingxi asked in bewilderment. "How so?" Xueqi came over and snatched the saber away. This time, the saber's reaction was even more intense, jumping continuously in Xueqi's hand. Xueqi was so shocked that she quickly returned the saber to Lingxi. When she saw the Phoenix's Cry saber become motionless once it was returned to Lingxi's hand, she could not help but think of something. She then cried out in shock and envy, "It's a treasured saber with intelligence." As soon as he shouted, the surroundings immediately fell silent. All the girls were elites from noble families. How could they not know the meaning behind her words? A treasured saber with intelligence would choose its own master. Once it recognized its master, it would never change. I've seen this phoenix's cry saber before. Xia Yuhan looked puzzled. I've seen it when it was in Shiman Wandai's hands. It was just that the saber looked ordinary then, it didn't have such elegance. The feeling of this saber is different from before. The color and luster of the saber are different. Xia Yuhan said as she looked at it. What's going on? Yu Rulon said. This saber must have had a new encounter. It was only a lady's saber when it was in Shiman Wandai's hands, but when it was in young Master Yun's hands, young Master Yun must have made some changes to the saber, allowing it to possess intelligence. Lingxi's fortuitous encounter to obtain this saber is truly a fortuitous encounter. That's right. The initial change in Lingxi's body was after she left Tiantang City. It was a very short period of time, but there was a huge change and everything became better. I think what you complained about falling back then wasn't the dandruff but the impurities in your body. It was after this saber was connected to your spiritual source and became one with the saber, helping you to cleanse your body and force out the impurities. That's why your body has undergone such a transformation, as if you've been reborn. Yu Rulon sucked in a deep breath, her gaze filled with envy as she looked at Ji Lingxi. That's why I said, that young Master Yun, although he looks like a block of wood and is unromantic, in fact, he's really nice to you. He actually gave such a rare treasure to you without a word. I think the reason why he didn't say anything is probably because he's afraid of pressuring you. Ji Lingxi's face was glowing as she asked joyfully, Is this true? Silly girl. Yu Rulon was indeed envious, but what she was truly envious of was not the phoenix's cry, but the affection that this saber represented when he gave it away. It's a pity that this saber is completely useless to us because this saber only belongs to you. It won't give its energy to us, but to you, Lingxi, you'll be enjoying the help of this saber at all times, Yu Rulon said. You've only been connected to this saber for a short time now, so you haven't experienced more of its benefits. Right, your current cultivation base has broken through to the 7th peak, hasn't it? It's only been a short 2 months and you've broken through 2 levels consecutively. Would it have been possible if it had been before? This is the benefit of this saber. Ji Lingxi blushed as she shook her head lightly. The girls stared at Ji Lingxi with undisguised envy. Along with their envy, there was also a hint of jealousy. Why isn't there someone who treats me like this? More than that, however, they were happy for Ji Lingxi. It was because she had such a treasured saber, and because someone could give it to her without feeling the slightest bit of heartache. A treasured saber with a spiritual nature like this was a family heirloom even among the 8 noble families. It was one of a kind. Even elites like them would find it hard to own one. If the Shiman family knew that this saber had actually transformed into what it is now, I wonder how much they'd regret it. Yu Rulon looked at her sisters sternly. Only the few of us will know about this. We mustn't leak this out. Otherwise, Lingxi will be in trouble. The sisters replied in unison, Don't worry, this is our secret. How can we tell anyone else? That night, Ji Lingxi was sleeping in her room when Yu Xiong'er crawled into her room and insisted on sharing the same bed. She hugged Ji Lingxi to sleep for the entire night despite the hot weather. The next day, she realized that she had indeed benefited from Yu Xiong'er's favor. There were indeed flakes on her arms that looked like they were about to fall off. Therefore, Ji Lingxi was completely dominated by Yu Xiong'er for the next few nights. A few days later, Yu Xiong'er's ecstatic cries attracted everyone's attention. Ever since then, Ji Lingxi had become a hot commodity. Therefore, there would be a sister hugging her to sleep every night. Each of them was thick-skinned and could not be chased away, claiming that they wanted to benefit from young Master Yun's glory as well. I want to sleep so badly. Ji Lingxi was sleepwalking for the rest of the night. She could not sleep well for many consecutive nights, yawning incessantly at the hands of her unscrupulous sisters. Nevertheless, the sisters were glowing with radiance. Finally, on this day, the sudden news made the girls' joy vanish in an instant. According to investigations, young Master Lingfeng has been found. He's the son of Moon Shadow City's castellan. His name is Niu Lingfeng. He was born in a certain year and a certain month. His age, appearance, etc. When the detailed news arrived, it was as if a bolt of lightning had struck Yu Rulon's head. Her face paled and her delicate body swayed. The fantasy that had been in her heart for a long time was suddenly shattered. It was not him. Chapter 156. The girls were pale as well. Ji Lingxi's body swayed, but she did not forget to support Yu Rulan.
Sister Lan. Yu Rulan's gaze was already somber. She murmured, Ji Lingfeng, where are you?
Once Yu Rulan finished speaking, she suddenly coughed and spat out a mouthful of crimson blood from her red lips before she fainted. Yu Rulan was mentally and physically exhausted from such a long search. The only reason she could still hold on without breaking down was because there was still a faint hope in her heart. However, each piece of news was proven to be false and each hope was crushed like a bubble. Yu Rulan's footsteps had almost covered half the continent, but there was no result. The shattering of her hope this time was more like the straw that broke the camel's back. She could no longer hold on. Ji Lingxi's eyes were rimmed red. Brother, where are you? Why can't I find you after searching the entire world? What do we do now? Yu Xiong'er asked in a trembling voice. The girls were silent, speechless for a moment. Ji Lingxi stood there stiffly, her mind blank. It was at this moment that she suddenly felt her own weakness. Sister Rulan, who had been accompanying and comforting her since her brother's disappearance, had collapsed as well. The dazed Ji Lingxi suddenly felt a sense of hopelessness, as if there was no one she could rely on despite the vastness of the world. She murmured almost instinctively, What should we do? Where are we going? Her heart ached as tears streamed down her cheeks. Yu Xiong'er murmured, We've been out for so long. My family asked me to go back directly this time. Lingxi, why don't you and Sister Lan come to my house for some time? We'll think of a way slowly. There will be a turn for the better. Xia Yuhan said in a low voice as well, My family wants me to go back too. They've urged me a few times. Lingxi, it's not a good idea for us to search aimlessly like this. Yu Rulan, who was in Ji Lingxi's arms, woke up slowly and sighed tiredly, saying, Actually, our sisters have helped a lot. Cuff. You can go back first this time. We'll search again when there's news. Or, we can find some time to meet again. You don't have to worry too much about me and Lingxi. We're going back this time too. Yu Rulan said weakly, We have so many guards with us, they're all experts. Nothing will happen. Yu Xiong'er asked worriedly, But where are you going? Determination gleamed in Yu Rulan's eyes as she gritted her teeth softly and said, One of the places where the exact news came from is this young Master Ling Feng, while the other is Tiantang City. Yu Rulan said firmly, Since it's confirmed that it's not the former, let's go back to Tiantang City. Hearing the three words Tiantang City, Ji Lingxi's eyes glowed. Tiantang City. Nothing happened that night. The next morning, the sisters parted with tears. Yu Xiong'er hugged Ji Lingxi and cried for a long time before she was finally persuaded to leave. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan brought 40 to 50 guards with them and began their return journey. However, along the way it was completely silent. Yu Rulan was the only one who had made up her mind resolutely. After confirming that the young Master Ling Feng was not Ji Lingfeng, Yu Rulan's heart was filled with despair. It was a hopeless feeling, like there was nothing left to live for. However, it was also because of this that she had suggested to return to Tiantang City. Yun Yang was still there. Young Master Yun. Someone Ji Lingxi liked. Since I've already tasted the feeling of losing my love forever, it's such a heart-wrenching pain. Then, I'll think of a way to prevent Lingxi from experiencing the same feeling. Lingfeng, even if I can't find you in this lifetime, I'll still use the rest of my life to search for you. I'll continue searching for you in my next life as well. But even if I can't find you forever, I'll take good care of your sister. Your only sister. Yu Rulan's hair and white gown fluttered in the wind, her face indescribably calm. Ji Lingfeng, do you still remember what I told you before? Even if you can travel thousands of miles with the wind and disappear from the world, the moonlight will still exist forever, generation after generation. Gentle and lingering, unchanging through the ages. Even if I'm an orchid in an empty valley, guarding it for the rest of my life, I'll still wait quietly for the person who can smell my orchid fragrance. The sisters who had left sighed as well. All of us can go home, but only Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan can't. They would be forced into marriage once they returned, and it would be the kind that they could never resist. I can only bless all of you that you can find Brother Lingfeng. Yu Xiong'er turned back to look at the distant mountains, tears glistening in her eyes. If you have any difficulties, don't forget to look for us. Yun Yang could vaguely feel that something was amiss.
He had been waiting for the old marshal to bring the emperor to look for him in the past few days, but there was no sign of them.
What was going on? Yunyang was certain that his endless divine art could alleviate His Majesty's poison and even his physical condition. He was the only person who would not harm the emperor at all. He believed that both His Majesty and the old marshal knew this, but why had they not come to look for him? It was understandable if it was just His Majesty, but there was no news from the old marshal either. It was puzzling. There was also Xue Wuyin from the Towering Wind Pavilion. Yunyang had gone to the Towering Wind Pavilion a dozen times during this period of time, but the host, Xue Wuyin, was nowhere to be seen. Where had Xue Wuyin gone? Yunyang was very sure that Xue Wuyin was in Tiantang City and was secretly watching the Towering Wind Pavilion. However, Yunyang could not find him no matter what. Yunyang was puzzled by this as well. He was indeed 8th Brother Supreme Wind's right-hand man. Yunyang could not even find him in his current state. He was indeed a talent. On this day, when Yunyang was on his way to Sira's house, there was a group of people heading towards him. They were from the Crown Prince's residence. Yunyang spotted Han Wufei at first glance. At this moment, this fellow was staring at her with a sullen expression, and his fingers were still pointing at her. The 4 middle-aged men dressed in black beside him turned their heads at the same time. Their gazes focused on Yunyang as well. Yunyang clearly felt as if 4 sharp arrows had been shot at his face at the same time. For a moment, his face actually felt an actual pain. These 4 people were experts, top-notch experts. Thinking of this, Yunyang halted his steps and looked at the group of people in front of him. These fellows had come with ill intentions. The group of people parted to the left and right as a young man dressed in a bright yellow robe walked out with his arms behind his back. He had a majestic gait and a graceful bearing. This person wore a warm smile on his face, giving anyone who saw him a comfortable feeling, as if they were bathed in a spring breeze. Moreover, the natural nobility and grace that flowed from his body caused him to reveal an extraordinary aura that was high and mighty, as if he was looking down at the world from above. The person in front of him was the current Crown Prince. His Majesty the Emperor's second son, Yu Chenglong. The Crown Prince did not say a word once he appeared, but the intimidating aura that he exuded had already silenced the group of people who had been tempted to make a move. No one dared to act rashly. I've long heard of young Master Yun's great name. I can't wait to meet you sooner. I didn't expect that I could only see young Master Yun's face today. It's true that hearing about you is better than meeting you in person. The Crown Prince smiled and said, Young Master Yun's elegance is indeed unparalleled in Tiantang. Yunyang observed the face in front of him quietly, feeling that something was amiss the more he looked at it. Looking at the person in front of him, he instinctively recalled the face he had seen in Soul's dream when he was severely injured. If this face could be more mature, friendlier, with a darker complexion and less thick brows, it would almost be like the eldest Supreme Earth had appeared before him. However, it was these insignificant differences that created an unusual sense of uneasiness. Yunyang suppressed the ripples in his heart and said faintly, Your Highness's royal demeanor has impressed Yunyang even more. I've long heard that Your Highness is a modest gentleman who seeks talents and treats people without any arrogance. Seeing you today, I can see that you live up to your reputation. This is what it means to hear about you in person. It's true that meeting about you in person is better than meeting you in person. His Highness laughed heartily and said, The world belongs to the people of this world. The so-called royal family is only responsible for patrolling the heavens and making decisions on behalf of the people. What arrogance is there to speak of? Young Master Yun must be joking. Yunyang laughed and said, However, I wonder what business Your Highness has in stopping me like this? The Crown Prince said with sincerity, I've always wanted to meet young Master Yun, so I sent someone to invite you the day before yesterday. I didn't expect him to misunderstand me and offend young Master Yun. Young Master Yun is not at fault in this matter and can't be blamed for anything else. I can only blame myself for not making things clear. Since we're fated to meet today, of course I have to apologize to young Master Yun and explain what happened in the past. As he spoke, he stood up solemnly and said in a clear voice, Young Master Yun, I'm sorry. What happened the day before yesterday was entirely my fault. Han Wufei, who was standing aside, was visibly shaken. Although he had someone else in his heart and was not really working for the Crown Prince, he could not help but feel grateful when he saw the Crown Prince's actions. Even when he knew that the Crown Prince was putting on an act to buy people's hearts, It was not an easy feat for a crown prince of a country to put on such a humble front. He was capable of what others could not and tolerated what others could not. Yun Yong turned to the side and said, "Your Highness has spoken too seriously. Like what you said, it was only a small misunderstanding from the beginning to the end. There's no need to be so serious and make such a big fuss about it." The crown prince wore a smile on his face, but he was grumbling inwardly. A small misunderstanding? It was that little misunderstanding of yours that made me feel extremely uncomfortable these past few days. All the civil and military officials looked at me with suspicion and conjecture. It's as if I'm being roasted on fire. It's easy for you to say such a small misunderstanding, but how can I not be cautious? I have to make a big fuss about it and take it seriously. Only then can I show my magnanimity and my lack of malice. Despite his grumbling, the crown prince still looked amiable as he laughed heartily and said, "Since young Master Yun doesn't mind, a chance encounter is better than a chance encounter. Would young Master Yun be in the mood to have a drink with me?" Chapter 157. Yun Yang's gaze flickered as he said, "Since your Highness is in such a good mood, this lowly one shall accompany you. However, this young brother should be the host this time. Come, let us make a trip to Sira's house. I'm more familiar with the place." Han Wufei hollered coldly, "How dare you? What kind of status does the crown prince have? Why would he go with you to such a filthy, despicable place filled with lust? With his Highness status, if he were to really go to Sira's house, he would definitely be impeached by the censor tomorrow. No matter how clean Sira's house was and how righteous it was, a brothel was still a brothel to outsiders. It would not stop selling one's body just because one did not sell one's body." However, Han Wufei's words were harsh to the ears. Yun Yong smiled coldly when he heard that. "If your Highness doesn't wish to go, or can't go, just tell me directly. Why do you have to be so disrespectful? I'm inviting your Highness for a drink and I'm paying to be the host. It's all my sincerity. Am I not treating you with sincerity?" The crown prince's brows furrowed slightly. Another person beside him quickly stepped forward and said respectfully with a smile, "Perhaps young Master Yun doesn't know this, but with his Highness status, his reputation would be tarnished if he were to go to Sira's house. Young Master Yun is not an official of the imperial court. It's normal that you don't know about this." Yun Yong raised his eyebrows and said, "Are you implying that I'm useless and have given up on myself? I'm even dragging his Highness down with me. Do you harbor ill intentions?" Once he spoke, everyone was shocked. No one had expected Yun Yang's words to be so incisive and so merciless. The person who had spoken up just now flushed, stunned and speechless. This was the sharpness of his words, but who would expose such words in front of everyone? The crown prince's expression remained unchanged as he chuckled softly and said, "Young Master Yun, what are you talking about? I've long heard of Sira's house's reputation. It's just that it's inconvenient for me to go there due to my status. Young Master Yun, you're free to come and go as you please, unfettered and unrestrained. That's true freedom. I can't wait to be envious." Yun Yong said, "Your Highness's words show the magnanimity of a nation's heir apparent." Yun Yong is filled with admiration. However, the words of these two henchmen beside you are really infuriating. One of them speaks rudely, and the other even mocked that I am not a high-ranking official. I am not stupid. How could I not understand the meaning behind their words? It's just that your Highness bringing these two people with you, forgive me for speaking bluntly, I'm afraid that it will only bring you trouble and not help you at all. The only benefit is that it will help your Highness lower your status." Before they could speak, Yun Yong continued, "I'm speaking the truth. I've only interacted with your Highness the Crown Prince twice, directly or indirectly, but I've been offended by both of them. Your Highness the Crown Prince is magnanimous, of course you don't mind, but I really think that these two fellows are spies sent to you by some force. Specifically offending everyone for you, your Highness. You must be on your guard against this. Although you mustn't have the heart to harm others, you mustn't have the heart to guard against others. Who knows, someone else might take advantage of it." Once these words left his mouth, the smile that hung by the corners of his Highness' lips vanished completely. This was practically a cannon on the entire map. He could capture all the princes in one fell swoop. This fellow's eloquence was one thing, but his ability to stir up trouble was not to be underestimated. The Crown Prince sucked in a breath and resumed his warm smile. "Brother Yun, you're exaggerating. Since Brother Yun is not available today, why don't we meet another day? By then, I'll send an invitation to young Master Yun's residence. Young Master Yun must do me the honor.
His Highness the Crown Prince was having a hard time dealing with such an unscrupulous fellow.
If he continued to stay, he really didn't know what kind of terrifying things he would say in public. Yun Yang said, I didn't say that I'm not available today. I've just said that I'm the host. How is it not available? Your Highness has misunderstood. Many people around them looked at this fellow as if they were looking at a mental patient. Almost everyone felt that this kid was simply a unique weirdo of his generation.
His Highness the Crown Prince had already given you enough face and spoken so politely, but you actually said, I didn't say that it's not available?
This sentence was simply unimaginable.
Those from the Crown Prince's residence glared at him in anger.
Misunderstanding. F***ck your grandma's misunderstanding. His Highness the Crown Prince tried his best to maintain the smile on his face. Then, what does Brother Yun mean?
It's fate that we've met.
Since we're fated, how can we not have a good time together? Speaking of places like this in Tiantang City, there's no place like Cirrus House. Since it's not convenient for your Highness to go with your original identity, you can always disguise yourself. Don't worry, I'm very popular in Cirrus House. I can definitely make your Highness feel at home and enjoy yourself so much that you forget about going home and thinking twice. Yun Yang invited enthusiastically.
His Highness the Crown Prince was utterly speechless as he looked at the strange expressions on the faces of the people around him.
So many people have heard it. Is there any use in disguising myself? And all that feel at home. Enjoy yourself so much that you forget about going home. Thinking twice.
Are these really the words that the only son of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds should say?
When His Highness the Crown Prince left, he felt that his mind was a little muddled. He had long heard of this fellow's reputation as a popinjay, but he had never expected this bastard to have such a low EQ. He was the legitimate son of Marquis Yun, but he was only at this level. He was truly unworthy of cultivation. In other words, what the hell was he doing? Han Wufei and the others who followed beside the Crown Prince were livid with rage. As long as the Crown Prince gave the order, these people would turn back immediately and devour Yun Yang alive, even if it was in broad daylight. His Highness the Crown Prince suddenly fell into deep thought as he walked. He finally snapped out of his trance. This isn't right. His Highness the Crown Prince frowned and said in a low voice, This Yun Yang. Although there were rumors of him being a popinjay, there weren't any bad records. Secondly, how could someone who could be acknowledged by Ling Xiaozue be an ordinary person? He's purposely angering me today, using this to confuse me and interfere with my judgment. But why would he purposely anger me? His Highness the Crown Prince was still puzzled.
Beside him, a scholar in his 30s who had been silent all this while said with a smile, Not necessarily purposely angering the Crown Prince. Perhaps I should say that this young Master Yun would have done the same no matter which prince he met today.
His Highness the Crown Prince was slightly enlightened, but he was still confused. Please elaborate, sir. The middle-aged scholar said, There's only one intention for Yun Yang to do this. He wants all the princes, including the Crown Prince, to stop looking for him. He's purposely distancing himself from the royal family. He won't be involved in anything related to the royal family. The middle-aged scholar said, His actions today have angered the Crown Prince and it seems like he's greatly offended your Highness, but the Crown Prince won't really blame him. There's no grudge to speak of. After this, the other princes will know that even the Crown Prince was rebuffed when he took action personally. Yun Yang can then enjoy peace and quiet from now on. He can just sit back and watch the battle unfold. Taking a step back, no matter how popinjay he is, he has Marquis Yun supporting him and Marquis Yun is His Majesty's sworn brother. No matter which prince gains power in the end, as long as His Majesty and Marquis Yun are still around, he can rest easy. The middle-aged scholar smiled. Besides, his biggest motive for doing so is to pull Marquis Yun out of this whirlpool as well. This is the way to protect himself, and it is also the foundation of the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds lineage. He looks like a popinjay, but he's actually very smart. I see. His Highness was enlightened.
However, since we know that this son of Marquis Yun is scheming,
the middle-aged scholar said with a smile, it's a good thing that the other princes don't dare make a move, but the Crown Prince can still pull Marquis Yun's entire family over with some tricks. Besides, this can be done through this young Master Yun.
The Crown Prince mused. What should I do?
The Crown Prince said something very ingenious just now. The middle-aged scholar said, You've said that you're going to send him an invitation. That's a stroke of genius.
The Crown Prince was enlightened, clapping his hands as he said with a smile, Not bad, not bad.
Then he frowned again.
But if there's another incident, it's fine.
Your Highness can just continue to send invitations. What he wants to do is his business, but how we respond to him is our magnanimity.
The middle-aged scholar smiled confidently.
It doesn't matter even if he's unmoved by force or persuasion. As long as Marquis Yun comes back and knows that his son has offended all the princes except for the Crown Prince, who has been showing goodwill time and again. What do you think will be Marquis Yun's reaction?
He smiled with his eyes squinted and said, There's a saying in the common people's home, to think highly of a child is to think highly of an adult.
This saying applies to Marquis Yun as well.
By then, even if Marquis Yun can't be pulled over, at the very least, Marquis Yun won't take the initiative to go against Your Highness the Crown Prince.
His Highness was enlightened this time as he said with a smile, Brilliant! Brilliant! Sir's plan is brilliant indeed, subduing the enemy without a fight.
Sir is truly my right-hand man, my right-hand man.
I dare not, I dare not. The middle-aged scholar smiled faintly. Yun Yang watched as the Crown Prince tried his best to maintain his composure and grace as he left. His gaze was deep, his thoughts unknown. Then he turned into the Cirrus house. The middle-aged scholar was only half right about the reason why Yun Yang did so.
As for the other half, staying with these so-called princes, there's only discomfort in my heart.
Yun Yang murmured in his heart, Eldest is fighting a bloody battle out there, risking his life.
Those clothes should have been his.
Humph. Yun Yang was a little petulant and a little willful in this matter. He knew that if he were to borrow the Crown Prince's influence and feign civility, it would be beneficial to his plan, but he was not prepared to correct his willfulness. So what if I offend you? I just can't stand to see you wearing those clothes. So what? Even if you're a good person, I can't stand it. I'm being willful, so what? Chapter 158.
No matter how much I dislike him, this Crown Prince seems to be ignorant of the sufferings of the outside world because he was brought up deep in the palace, but he still has some degree of sophistication.
Yun Yang thought to himself, Let's see what he does. It's best that he doesn't bother me. If he really does, I'll just go with the flow. The residence of Qiu Zhenhan, who had only been separated from Yun Yang for a few days, had lost a lot of weight. It was one thing for Yun Yang to say it, and another for him to prove that the emperor was poisoned. However, this was a serious matter after all. After discussing it with His Majesty, the old marshal decided to handle it properly. They could not just listen to what a junior like Yun Yang said. How could the situation be so dire when he said it was so critical? What if Yun Yang was exaggerating and was only trying to emphasize his own importance? Both His Majesty and the old marshal had thought of this. The greatest merit was to save the emperor. Helping the emperor to ease his condition and saving the emperor's life were two completely different concepts. Yutong's top miracle physician had come to the residence of Marshal during the few days when Yun Yang was filled with doubts. Holy hands, Yu Tiexin. However, the world respectfully called him 3-inch Yu. 3-inch golden needles could save life and death. Within 3 inches, it could save a person's life and death, break someone's life and death, and save someone's life. The old miracle physician had saved the world with golden needles. He had been saving people for 70 years and his hair had turned white. This old man was Qiu Zhenhan's sworn brother, and one of the few people he trusted the most in this world. If it were not for old Marshal Qiu, the emperor himself might not have been able to invite old Yu. Even if old Yu had been willing to come, he would not have come so quickly. At this moment, His Majesty was lying on the bed in front of him. The old marshal looked anxiously at Yu Tiexin, who was sitting in front of the bed. Yu Tiexin's expression was extremely grim. The Way of Heaven physician was fully unleashed as a unique mystical qi filled with vitality flowed continuously through the emperor's meridians. After a long time, old Yu retracted his mystical qi and sighed softly. With a wave of his right hand, 108 golden needles filled the emperor from head to toe with a swoosh. In an instant, His Majesty had turned into a human-shaped hedgehog. Yu Tiexin took a deep breath. However, at this moment,
The godly doctor's face was covered in fine beads of sweat.
Just this instant of moving the needle had consumed more than 95% of his Xueqi. According to common sense at this moment, old man Yu should be meditating and adjusting his breathing, calming himself down.
Consuming more than 90% of his profound energy in an instant would inevitably hurt any cultivator's vitality.
Even if old man Yu's cultivation focused more on health, it was no exception.
However, Divine Physician Yu forcefully took a deep breath, and his 10 fingers instantly turned into a ball of afterimages.
On His Majesty's body, he continuously poked, and shook. 108 needles were paired with 108 techniques in a complete cycle. The illusion suddenly disappeared. Yu Tiexin's breathing grew heavier, but he did not slow down at all. Another golden needle appeared in his right hand.
With a flash of cold light, it silently pierced through the tip of the Emperor's left index finger.
Buzz, buzz, buzz. When old man Yu's last golden needle pierced through the Emperor's body, the originally motionless 108 golden needles trembled in unison, emitting a buzzing sound. Immediately, a black line visible to the naked eye flowed along the meridians in His Majesty's left hand, surging towards his index finger at an extremely fast speed. Finally, a drop of black blood rushed out of his body. Yu Tiexin quickly caught it with a tiny jade bottle that was only the size of a finger. The golden needles suddenly trembled again, but the black line suddenly stopped and did not move. No, after a moment of stalemate, it actually began to slowly retreat. After another moment, the black line had already disappeared without a trace. His skin also returned to its original color, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. The golden needles continued to buzz, but His Majesty's body no longer moved. After a long time, the golden needles had calmed down completely. Yu Tiexin was completely drained, sweating profusely. His breathing was labored, and his vision was a little blurry. This was the after effect of exhausting a large amount of his mystical qi and forcefully sustaining the needles.
The old divine physician forcefully controlled himself and removed all the golden needles from His Majesty's body. He did not even have the time to store them into the box before he fell to the ground, sweating profusely and looking pale.
The golden needles that had just been removed scattered all over the ground. Qiu Zhenhan was shocked. He went forward to support the Emperor quickly and channeled a pure mystical qi slowly into Yu Tiexin's meridians. The old marshal's mystical skill was different from old man Yu's, so he could not help old man Yu when he was performing the needles. However, the old marshal's skill was profound. Although it was twice the effort for half the result, it could still slightly replenish old man Yu's damaged energy. After some time, Yu Tiexin finally calmed down. His Majesty had already sat up from his bed, his gaze fixed on Yu Tiexin. His gaze could not hide the sadness that flowed from it. Although he tried his best to act like he did not care, he really could not do it. Even though he was an emperor throughout the ages. However, this poison that came from within the palace still made this brilliant emperor of a generation feel a bone-piercing pain. Yu Tiexin finally opened his eyes. His gaze was still filled with intense fatigue. How is it? Qiu Zhenhan was hopeful. Yu Tiexin did not answer. He held the tiny jade bottle in his hand as white fog began to rise from his body. The unique mystical qi of the Way of Heaven's physician was activated once more. After a while, he put the jade bottle down. Qiu Zhenhan and His Majesty looked over and saw that the drop of blood in the jade bottle had disappeared. What replaced it were streaks of fog of various colors that lingered in the jade bottle. Looking at the colors and luster of the fog in the jade bottle, Yu Tiexin's expression grew increasingly grim. There are a total of 12 colors. Yu Tiexin sighed when he finally confirmed the composition of the poison. The old marshal was puzzled. What do you mean? If there is only one color in this bottle, it means that this person is not poisoned. That is the color that a person should have. The more colors there are, the more types of poisons there are in the body. Yu Tiexin rubbed his temples in distress. In other words, the poison that Your Majesty has been inflicted with is not just one type of poison, but a mixture of poisons.
It should be a type of medicine that is not harmful to the body, or even beneficial to the body if only one or a few types of medicines are taken.
However, when these 12 medicines are combined together and fused over a long period of time, it has evolved into this kind of terrifying poison that is deadly enough to kill Your Majesty. The old marshal and His Majesty's expressions changed at the same time. This also means that your majesty has to go through at least 11 processes to be poisoned. Moreover, it has to be consumed over a long period of time for this to happen. Yu Tiexin shook his head. How could such a ridiculous thing happen in the inner court of the palace?
It's unbelievable and unimaginable. The old marshal and his majesty were speechless. Both of their expressions changed at the same time because of this matter and the severity of it.
If there was only one place where the poison had been placed, it would still be understandable. However, there were 11 places now. It was too terrifying. In other words, it was too horrifying. At least 11 types of medicinal items. If it were only one of them, it wouldn't be a big deal at all. However, when all 11 types of medicinal items are combined, the effect of the poison is even more terrifying than the shadowless poison that's known to be the most poisonous in the world. With your majesty's cultivation base, even if you were to be poisoned by the shadowless poison, there's still room for recovery as long as you're treated in time and properly.
However, this poison...
Yu Tiexin sighed. Qiu Jianhan's expression changed abruptly. His face paled. The legendary shadowless poison would leave no shadow, no trace, and no trace. One would be poisoned without any discovery. When the poison fully erupted, it would turn the poisoned person into a cloud of smoke, and from then on, disappear from this world without a trace. This was the shadowless poison. It was also the poison that Tianxian continent's experts were famed for. It was also because of this that this poison was unrivaled in the poison of Tianxian continent. However, even such a potent poison could not compare to the poison that His Majesty was currently afflicted with. Can it be cured? The old marshal's voice was trembling. Yutong's top miracle physician, who had a way to deal with the shadowless poison, could not possibly be completely helpless. Yu Tiexin looked both mentally and physically exhausted.
I can't.
Puff. Qiu Jianhan plopped down on the chair, dumbfounded. Not only can it not be cured, there's something else. Yu Tiexin continued. The complexity of this poison can be said to have reached a stage where it surpasses nature's workmanship. If I were to disregard my standpoint, this old man would covet this poison. However, it's because of this that this secret recipe alone isn't something an ordinary person can possess. To be able to possess such a recipe and be able to use it. Yu Tiexin's facial muscles twitched. This old man. Can't imagine what kind of force it is. His Majesty's expression was unruffled. Even at this moment, he was still calm. He stood up quietly and said faintly, I'm not afraid of death. Although it's a pity, this is fate. I can only let it go. However, the only thing that makes me feel heart-wrenching pain right now is the person who poisoned me. His Majesty wore an extremely tragic smile on his face. The person who can do this and has the ability to do it must be one of the closest and most trusted people to me.
He sucked in a deep breath.
Yutong. There's a war on the outside and a traitor on the inside. The west is barren for thousands of miles, there's no harvest, there's a drought. The south is flooded and the people have lost their homes. This country is about to fall apart. How can I leave like this without worry? How can I be willing to close my eyes just like this?
His Majesty's eyes were filled with melancholy.
Is there really no cure? There's not even a chance to try? The old marshal looked at Yu Tiexin hopelessly, feeling his heart trembling. Chapter 159. Yu Tiexin lowered his head dejectedly, not daring to look back at his old friend, old Marshal Qiu. He didn't say anything, but his attitude was more detailed than 1,000 words could be said. If you can't cure it, can't anyone else? The old marshal was unwilling to give up. Based on my knowledge of this poison, no one in this world can cure it. Even the person who poisoned me might not have the antidote. Yu Tiexin was certain of this judgment. This was the confidence that divine physician Yu had built up from his lifetime of practicing medicine. However, this confidence had dealt a hopeless blow to the old marshal. Amidst the silence, Yu Tiexin thought of something and said hesitantly, There's one more thing. Your Majesty, please don't be too agitated. What is it?
The Emperor's voice was calm.
Your Majesty has been poisoned for at least 10 years, and this poison has become one with the circulation of the profound qi in your meridians. In other words, this poison has already become a part of your body. Yu Tiexin stammered, not daring to say it out loud. However, he finally took a deep breath and said as if he was sacrificing himself for justice. It's just that. During these 10 years, if a child is born a prince or a princess, the emperor's expression changed abruptly. What? Xueqi lowered his head. Although his voice was low, his enunciation was clear. I'm afraid there might be something wrong. Boom. A table was smashed by the emperor's palm. His Majesty's body shook violently as he vented his anger, almost fainting on the spot. The heavy blow finally made His Majesty feel like he was going to break down completely. There were many concubines in the palace. As a man in his prime who had normal needs and a strong mystical cultivation base, how could the emperor be lacking in offspring during these 10 long years? In the past 10 years, there were more than 20 princes and princesses who were born one after another. If all these children... His Majesty dared not think further, his face draining of color. Qiu Zhenhan stood in a daze before he sprung up abruptly. Go. Invite young Master Yun. Ask him to come here immediately, no matter what he's doing. The old marshal's breathing was unprecedentedly rapid, his eyes bloodshot. He was in a state of near madness and collapse. Yun Yang's information had been verified, but the news was so unexpected. Initially, when Yun Yang had said in the palace that His Majesty's health was in danger, the old marshal had never thought that it was incurable, despite thinking that it was a serious matter. His greatest reliance was his sworn brother, the #1 miracle physician in the world, Xueqi. Yun Yang was still a young man after all. Even if he had some experience and capability, his abilities were still shallow. Even if he was not exaggerating, the situation might not actually be that bad. As long as he found out that he was poisoned and knew what kind of poison it was there any poison in this world that Xueqi could not cure? But reality proved that Xueqi could not solve it. Furthermore, it was very likely that no one in the world could cure this poison. Now, the old marshal's only hope was Yun Yang. This was the last straw of hope they had right now. When Yun Yang arrived, he saw the emperor standing before the window with his arms behind his back. Qiu Zhenhan and another person sat dumbly in the room, looking like they had lost their parents. How is it? Yun Yang asked with a smile. Old Sir must have something to ask me to come. What are you playing dumb for? Old Marshal Qiu Zhenhan pulled him over and slapped the back of his head, scolding. Don't you know why I've asked you to come here? Quickly. Tell me what solution you have, or I'll kill you if you don't. Yun Yang rubbed the back of his head, speechless. This is the first time I've seen someone beg with such an attitude, and it's happening to me. Yun Yang really wanted to turn and leave. He wanted to at least put on a show and delay the old marshal for a few days, to let this old man know why flowers were red and that Yun Yang's head should not be slapped. However, the person directly involved was His Majesty the Emperor. Even if this matter did not concern the Empire of Yutong, the fact that His Majesty the Emperor was the father of his eldest brother Supreme Earth made it impossible for him to not save him. Not only did he have to save him, he had to save him as soon as possible, with all his heart. Why does this feeling feel so? Will he have a solution? Xueqi stared at Yun Yang suspiciously. What could this young man in front of him do when even he was helpless and sighed at the poison? Yun Yang sat down and said quietly, Old Marshal, being impatient won't solve anything. What I need to know is, what's the outcome of these few days? Outcome? Incurable? A dead end? The old marshal blushed and was speechless for a long while. Strictly speaking, the old marshal could not be said to have done anything wrong. Yun Yang was still a child in the old marshal's eyes, a child who had just grown hair. Naturally, he had placed more hope on miracle physician Yu. After all, the one who was poisoned was His Majesty the Emperor, so the safest method was the priority. He could say this to anyone but to Yun Yang, the person in question. All right, I told you about His Majesty the Emperor's condition out of goodwill and even gave the method of treatment, but you've forgotten about me in the blink of an eye and found someone else to treat him. You've tried 13 times but failed, and now you're thinking of me. What the F***ck is this? Xueqi did not know much about this. Hearing Yun Yang's question, he naturally explained the current situation in detail. The old sir had practiced medicine all his life. He was not a shallow person. His explanation was extremely detailed and meticulous. Then, Ling. The old marshal was filled with anticipation. The medicine given by Ling Xiaozue was still in Yun Yang's hands. Before getting the confirmation from his old friend,
the top miracle physician. How would the old marshal dare to simply use the medicine on His Majesty the Emperor?
Don't worry, I've brought the medicine. It's right here. Yun Yang took out a jade bottle carefully. Inside it were 3 jade green medicinal pills. Each of them was the size of a lotus seed. The old marshal's eyes darted around, feeling that something was not right. The last time he showed them to this old man, they were only the size of soybeans. Why did they seem to have grown now? Could this old man have seen them wrongly? Yu Tiexin took it. Once he opened the cap, he could smell the rich spiritual qi. Without another word, he took a deep breath and closed the jade bottle immediately. Then he closed his eyes. Great medicine. Truly great medicine. After a long while, Yu Tiexin exhaled deeply and looked at the 3 pills enviously. May I ask, young brother, where did these 3 pills come from? Instead of calling them 3 pills, it's more like 3 lives. 3 lives. The old marshal perked up. What do you mean? These 3 pills aren't actually medicine. They don't even contain any medicinal ingredients. Yu Tiexin said with a sigh. But they are the purest qi of life. Any one of these pills can bring a severely injured and dying person back to life. Yu Tiexin said.
Then, to His Majesty, these 3 pills.
The old marshal asked anxiously. This. Yu Tiexin said, these 3 pills are undoubtedly very useful. They can really bring a person back from the brink of death. However, they can only increase the vitality of the user. In other words, they can only increase His Majesty's life force and strengthen his entire body. They aren't the antidote to the illness. I don't know if Elder Qiu can understand what I'm saying.
The old marshal coughed, looking rather ashen as he said, I don't quite understand.
These pills can't cure the illness, but they can increase His Majesty's body's resistance against the poison. Yu Tiexin said, this also means that His Majesty can only hold on for about 2 months at most.
However, with these 3 pills, His Majesty can at least hold on for another 3 years.
3 years? Qiu Zhenhan looked disappointed. Could it only prolong his death by 3 years? Old Qiu, what kind of attitude is this? How would you know how bad His Majesty's physical condition is now? Even the most precious treasures of heaven and earth in this world can hardly prolong His Majesty's life. These 3 spiritual pills can prolong His Majesty's life for 3 years.
It's already extremely precious. Actually, if His Majesty didn't have to work so hard, it wouldn't be a problem to hold on for another 5 or 10 years.
However, the problem now is that His Majesty is so tired every day. If he continues to exhaust himself for so many years, even with the support of the spiritual pills, it won't last long. What's more, he's still poisoned and in constant danger. Yu Tiexin sighed softly. His Majesty and old Marshal Qiu were silent as well. The nation's affairs were burdensome now, with internal and external troubles. Even though they were working so hard, they were merely treading on thin ice, afraid that something would go wrong and cause them to lose everything. How could it not be tiring under such circumstances? How could they let go of their busy duties and recuperate in peace? Anyone in the nation could let go of their duties, but not His Majesty. Well, Yun Yang coughed. These 3 people have all gone to study the effects of the pills. Is it really good to leave this brother aside? Could it be that her brother was not the most important?
This brother is more useful than that medicine. His Majesty smiled faintly and said generously, if I could be given another 3 years, not only would it be a blessing from the heavens, it would be a destiny that defies the heavens.
I should be content with what I have.
His smile was filled with calmness and wisdom, without the slightest hint of fear. This emperor, the Emperor of Yutong, should be someone who cherished his life the most and feared death the most, but he was so open-minded now, long disregarding life and death. However, there was more to this smile than before. It was a hint of viciousness, a viciousness that came from deep within his bones. Well, I think. Yun Yang could not help but be shocked as he watched the 3 of them talk about how they were going to prepare for their funeral 3 years from now and begin their vengeance now.
Chapter 160. What's wrong with you? Old Marshal Qiu glared at Yun Yang, obviously dissatisfied with the person's careless interruption that disregarded the occasion. Didn't they see that these people were so bold, ambitious and arrogant? I just wanted to say that I can actually help His Majesty delay the situation with this medicinal pill. Yun Yang looked at Qiu Zhenhan innocently. The mystical skill and mystical chi that I cultivate has a unique effect in resisting various poisons and substances in this world. As long as I comb through His Majesty's meridians every few days, the poison can be suppressed. I'm very confident about this.
Wasn't it proven the other day?
What? What did you say? Qiu Jianhan could not quite believe what he had just heard. Even his old brother, the unrivaled physician Yu Tixin, whom he had high hopes for, was helpless against such a venomous poison. How dare you say that you can handle it? If you are so capable, why don't you ascend to the heavens? I'm speaking the truth. I've helped His Majesty comb through his meridians that day. Otherwise, do you think that His Majesty's intelligence is so clear now? It's because I've suppressed the poison that has invaded His Majesty's head that His Majesty has regained consciousness. Old Marshal, you can't erase such a huge contribution from me,
Yun Yang said with a face full of grievance.
The three of them were stunned when they heard him. Old Marshal Qiu recalled what had happened that day.
His Majesty's mind had been muddled then, without the wisdom and decisiveness he was now.
It was all because of Yun Yang's contribution. Did it not mean that things were not as hopeless as they seemed? Why didn't you say so earlier? It's such an important matter. Qiu Jianhan was enraged amidst his joy. Looking at the unreasonable old man, Yun Yang was speechless. Old Marshal, one has to be reasonable. I've told you about His Majesty's physical condition and countermeasures after I helped him comb through his body the other day, but you didn't say anything else. You only thought of me today. No, it wasn't me that you thought of, it was the 3 spiritual herbs. This is the 3rd time I've said it today. Yun Yang was speechless. You didn't. The old man was unreasonable. He immediately raised his hand, obviously intending to greet him with violence. Just pretend that you didn't say it.
Just take it that I've forgotten to mention it.
A wise man submits to circumstances. Yun Yang quickly corrected himself and apologized. It's a moment of carelessness on my part.
You're a man of great virtue and seniority. Then what are you waiting for, brat?
Hurry up and come take a look at His Majesty. The old marshal blew at his beard. His face seemed to have turned red as well. Perhaps he was a little embarrassed or something, but it was not obvious. Yun Yang chuckled dryly.
Looking at Yu Tixin, who was already laughing by the side, and His Majesty the Emperor, whose eyes were filled with mirth, he nodded and bowed in agreement.
Then he stood up. He really couldn't afford to offend this old man. Let me try your mystical skill and mystical chi first, to get a feel for it. Yu Tixin extended his hand.
Yun Yang knew that there must be a reason for this old man to do so.
He was an expert in the medical field. His considerations must be thorough. He did not object, nor did he mind it. Instead, he channeled his unique mystical chi and circulated it through Yu Tixin's meridians. Yu Tixin's expression had already changed greatly before he had even completed one round. His eyes widened abruptly as he stared at Yun Yang, almost crying out in surprise. All right, that's enough, that's enough. Yu Tixin was trembling all over, his gaze towards Yun Yang burning with passion. Your Majesty, old marshal. Yu Tixin deliberated over his words and said after a while, with these 3 medicinal pills and young Master Yun's mystical skill, you only need to consume them one by one over 3 months. Young Master Yun will then circulate his chi on the side. The poison in your Majesty's body, at the very least, the most conservative estimate, he paused and said. At least for the next 5 years, there's no need to worry too much. Even if you use mystical chi occasionally, it's no big deal. Besides, if young Master Yun's cultivation base can improve in the future, or if His Majesty's poison can be slowly removed through young Master Yun's unique mystical skill, completely cured. He heaved a long sigh of relief. Yutong's fortune. The world's fortune.
With that, His Majesty could not help but be delighted, even though he had long disregarded his own life and death.
No matter how open-minded one was, as long as one could live, who would really want to die? As for old Marshal Qiu, he was overjoyed. If he had not restrained himself, he might have been dancing with joy. He took a step forward and patted Yun Yang's shoulder. Good lad. You're so capable. You'll be the empire of Yutong's national treasure in the future. Yun Yang moved behind His Majesty and secretly rolled his eyes for a while before he began the treatment. National treasure? This elder brother is a national treasure. His Majesty, who had consumed a pill and was cleared by Yun Yang's endless divine art, stood up in high spirits, feeling unprecedentedly relaxed.
He said in a refreshed manner, "It looks like I'm not fated to die yet. There will always be a savior from heaven."
His Majesty had actually started joking. Qiu Jianhan felt a huge weight lift off his shoulders.
"Still, your Majesty shouldn't be too careless,"
Yu Tiexin said. "You have to be careful during this period of time, especially when it comes to your diet. If the person who poisoned you finds out that your Majesty has taken a turn for the better, he might change his strategy. The enemy will always be in the light while we're in the dark. It's impossible to guard against it."
The old miracle physician had not finished his words. However, both the old marshal and His Majesty understood what he meant. His Majesty nodded faintly and said in a low voice, "Of course I understand."
These 5 short words were enough to send shivers down Yu Tiexin's spine even though he was used to life and death, as well as Lord Supreme Cloud who spent his days in front of the gates of hell. On the same night, a case of treason had suddenly broken out in the palace.
There were more than 300 eunuchs and 100 maids in the palace, including all the chefs in the imperial kitchen and even the emperor's 3 favorite concubines, as well as many eunuchs and maids in the imperial study and bedchamber, as well as the families of the 3 favored concubines.
All of them had been captured in one fell swoop. All of them were pushed out of the Meridian Gate and executed in public.
There were more than 8,000 people who had died in this wave. This wave of unforeseen events could be said to be huge, but the most incredible thing about this incident was the strength of the counterattack against the target. First, when the imperial guards were trying to arrest a few eunuchs in the palace, they were unexpectedly met with strong resistance. Among them, there were 7 or 8 eunuchs who had extraordinary skills of the 5th or 6th grade. After a fierce battle, the imperial guards who went to arrest them paid the price of a large number of casualties before they were able to capture all of them.
No, they did not manage to capture all of them. There were still 3 who had relied on their formidable abilities to break through the siege and escape with wounds all over their bodies.
A few of the maids by the side of the 3 favored concubines were quite skilled as well.
After the siege, one of them managed to break through the siege while the others were killed on the spot after a fierce battle. There were also the families of the 3 favored concubines. 2 of them were captured as they were caught off guard, while the other family had a private army of thousands of men. They fought head-on against the imperial guards who came to capture them. Not only did they not lose the upper hand, they even seemed to be on the offensive. It was only when the city guards mobilized 30,000 soldiers that the entire family was annihilated. After the battle, the entire capital city was plunged into an atmosphere of blood. The unprecedentedly thick stench of blood did not dissipate even after many days had passed. When His Majesty was enraged, corpses were everywhere and blood flowed like a river. The entire capital city was trembling. All the civil and military officials held their breaths. No one dared to act rashly. This so-called rebellion came so suddenly that it was extinguished like a thunderbolt. The 4th prince entered the palace to pay his respects. He did not have anything to do at first, but he did not know why he asked about this matter. His Majesty said darkly, "My son is quite concerned about this matter. I wonder which of your loyal subordinates' interests have been touched? You actually have to trouble me to ask about it personally. Since you are so concerned about it, why don't you take my throne? Do I need you to ask about how I do things? After you ask, do you need to reason with it and control it?" Faced with such sharp words, the 4th prince fled from the palace, drenched in sweat and scared out of his wits. Even after he left the palace and returned to his mansion, his lips were still green and his face was pale. This time, he was really frightened and fell ill after he returned home. The meaning of His Majesty's words was not only a heavy threat, but the core of it was a direct attack on the heart. Almost all the personnel in the imperial palace had undergone a complete change of blood. On the second day, the new head chef of the imperial kitchen seemed to have offended His Majesty's taboo. His Majesty flipped the dining table, flew into a rage, and beheaded him in public. Then, in the afternoon, another head chef was appointed. It was said that the Empress had pleaded for mercy for one of the concubines. His Majesty looked at the Empress coldly for a long time. Then, the Empress was grounded and had not left the Longevity Palace until now. It was also said that she would probably not be able to come out for a year after this. Only half of them have been chopped off this time. One night after the incident, His Majesty met old Marshal Qiu in secret and said frankly, "As for the others, I know who they are. But I can't do anything now. Qiu Jianhan comforted him. Your Majesty, it's already a joyous occasion that your dragon body is safe and sound. There will be plenty of opportunities to settle scores with these fellows in the future. There's no need to rush. It's not good to startle them. Chapter 161. As His Majesty enjoyed young Master Yun's mystical massage, he suddenly had the urge to test him. Yun Yang, say, the treasury is empty now. Not only are the military's rations and rewards insufficient, but the flood also requires a large amount of silver taels for relief. How should this be handled? Yun Yang was still thinking about the portrait in His Majesty's study. Feeling guilty, he answered instinctively, "What's so difficult about this? As long as we do this and so on, everything can be easily solved. Besides, His Majesty's butcher's knife is hanging in the air. Whoever dares to jump out to oppose is someone who deserves to die. It's just the right time to start with them. I believe that the person who jumps out will not be clean himself. Confiscating his family's wealth will be of some help this time as well." His Majesty and old Marshal Qiu looked at each other subconsciously as they listened to Yun Yang's suggestion, noticing the surprise in each other's eyes. This child's plan was brilliant. He could actually grasp the imperial court's affairs so precisely. His methods were ruthless, going straight for the vital points. What a talent! There was also the last part about copying the wealth of those who didn't make a name for themselves. It was simply the finishing touch. It was truly amazing. Yun Yang, do you have the intention to enter the imperial court as an official? His Majesty asked, seemingly unintentionally. No. Yun Yang was shocked. If I were to become an official, I'm afraid I would be beheaded by His Majesty within a few days. This nephew's ability to offend people is truly extraordinary. Becoming an official is equivalent to getting into trouble. It's better to save this trouble. His Majesty and old Marshal Qiu laughed together. Both of them were not offended by Yun Yang's rejection. They even thought that Yun Yang's answer was reasonable. Thinking about it, this fellow was indeed not suitable to be an official. If he were to be placed in front of others, he would be targeted by those with ulterior motives. Thus, they gave up on the idea of Yun Yang becoming an official or enlisting him. The next morning. The morning assembly. His Majesty had indeed brought up two matters. First, the soldiers' salaries, pensions, and rewards. Second, the funds related to the flood. The Board of Revenue's Minister of Revenue, who had heard of these two huge issues, almost went mad. Your Majesty, you only have so little money now. It's not enough no matter how you deal with it. Even if a copper coin was broken into 8 pieces, it still wouldn't be enough. Therefore, a group of civil officials immediately jumped out and said that the country's affairs are the most important and the people are the most important. I believe that the soldiers will understand if they suffer for a few months first. In the past, this was only the beginning of the daily quarrel. However, the emperor today was very different from the past. He flew into a rage and directly ordered the officials to be arrested. When I discuss state affairs, I need you all to come up with a plan, not a bunch of excuses. What I need is a good solution that takes care of both sides. Not for you to use flowery words of benevolence, righteousness, and morality to chill the loyalty of my soldiers who have been through hundreds of battles. Under the surprised and frightened gazes of the officials, the emperor suddenly stood up and looked down at the great hall. With his hands behind his back, he slowly said, "Take him down. Search the house and send the entire family to exile." "Have mercy, Your Majesty." A group of people stepped forward to plead for leniency. The soldiers need to be rewarded, the flood needs to be dealt with. The country is at a critical juncture, swaying in the wind and rain. We must respond to this crisis with a thunderous approach. Otherwise, how can we purge the world and fight against the external forces? We can think of other ways without money. However, without the soldiers and the people, is there still an empire of Yutong? This bastard is evasive and full of excuses. How can the soldiers' anger be quelled if we don't kill him? How can Yutong's laws be enforced if we don't punish him? After searching this bastard's house, deposit all the confiscated silver taels into the national treasury. The Board of Revenue will allocate it as soon as possible. Other than that, I would like to organize a donation here. I will save the palace's expenses for the next 3 years, earning about 1 million silver taels. My civil and military officials, Please support me accordingly. Also, auction off some unnecessary items in the palace.
Your Majesty, you mustn't.
A censor jumped out. Your Majesty's action will greatly damage the dignity of the royal family. Your Majesty, please reconsider. His Majesty said faintly, the soldiers who fought at the borders for me have no salary, the countless warriors who died in foreign lands have no pension, and the soldiers who have rendered meritorious service have no rewards. Without their sacrifice, how can there be the so-called dignity of the royal family? Where the flood has passed, there are wails and cries. Those who have died are Yutong's people. They are the foundation of Yutong, and these foundations are about to be destroyed. The entire empire of Yutong is in a state of turmoil, teetering on the brink of collapse. The nation is about to be destroyed, and you're still talking to me about the dignity of the royal family? If the nation is gone, how can there be any dignity of the royal family? Are you saying this for the dignity of the royal family, or are you reluctant to part with your own wealth? Men, take this bastard down. Push him out of the Meridian Gate and behead him in public.
2 men were beheaded.
All of you are my backbone, the pillars of the nation. Now, let us talk about the donation. All of you only need to say a number. Of course, do not shake the foundations of your families. If that happens, I won't be able to rest easy. Just do what you can. The officials were dumbfounded. This did not seem to be the right way to open it today. It had been close to 5 years since His Majesty had used such a ruthless tactic. What he did today was not just a ruthless tactic, but a hooligan's trick. Forcefully carrying out the Emperor's decision. Not to be denied. Not to be denied. You don't agree, do you? Fine, men. Behead him and confiscate his property. All of your property is gone. Your life is gone too. Then, carry out the next person's donation. Will you donate? Yes, His Majesty has succeeded. If you don't donate. All right. Have you seen the 2 examples? Do you want to lose your wealth, your family, and be cursed as a thief? If you don't want to stay, then just give in and listen to me. This official is willing to donate 1,000,000 silver taels. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan was the first to jump out. This official is willing to donate 1,000,000 silver taels.
Leng Daoyin jumped out.
This official is also willing to donate 1,000,000 silver taels. The Grand Commandant jumped out. All of the officials rolled their eyes at him. These 3 old ruffians were King annoying. Who didn't know the backgrounds of the 3 of them? Although the salaries of these 3 brothers were not low and there were other benefits, most of their money had been used to help the disabled soldiers and orphans of the martyrs. Where did you get so much money? What right did you have to ask for 1,000,000 silver taels? If you're so capable, why don't you go to heaven?
It's not that we're looking down on you, but if the 3 of you old men could gather 500,000 silver taels, we'd be willing to hang ourselves together.
This was obviously His Majesty's request. However, by doing so, you forced us into a tight corner. The 3 of you are indeed my left and right arms. I'm very comforted.
His Majesty was delighted.
This old official has little money. I don't have much savings in recent years. I'll just donate 500,000 silver taels. The Grand Preceptor sighed softly. On the military side, there were already 3 magnates taking the lead. Their momentum was unparalleled.
If there was no one among the civil officials to set an example, then, in the imperial court, would it not be one-sided and the words of the military would be the law?
Furthermore, it would be one-sided with His Majesty's inclination. This could not be allowed.
No matter how reluctant the Grand Preceptor was, he had still taken the lead and pledged 500,000 silver taels.
This official will donate 100,000 silver taels. This official will donate 200,000 silver taels. This was the idea that Yun Yang had thought of last night. Your Majesty can do this. Bring up the issue of the Treasury's insufficiency in the morning assembly, and someone will definitely jump out to stir up trouble. Your Majesty can get rid of this troublemaker. Then confiscate his family's assets and confiscate it from the Ministry of Revenue. Then, you can propose a donation from the officials. I believe there will still be someone who will jump out to stir up trouble. This person's position is good. If Your Majesty doesn't want to kill him, you only have to reprimand him. However, if it's someone who is ignorant and coincidentally someone whom Your Majesty wants dead, Your Majesty can kill another one then. As long as the two old marshals are willing to act as a pawn, this will be a success. At least, this method can solve the urgent problem.
There are many wealthy officials in the imperial court.
Who isn't afraid of death? How many people can really sacrifice their lives over their wealth?
I remember your majesty using this method before. The emperor's expression had darkened for a long time then.
He had indeed used this method before. However, how could his majesty stand it when this child brought it up so bluntly? He wanted to save face as well. That was why his majesty had asked if Yunyang wanted to be an official.
As long as this child had the desire to be an official and really became one, he could take advantage of someone like you who liked to speak the truth anytime he wanted.
Yunyang had unexpectedly but reasonably rejected the offer.
Then, of course, it was time for the drama of the morning assembly.
The scene in the morning assembly was swift and decisive, ruthless and decisive. It triggered a long-lost memory among the officials back then. His Majesty had done something like this as well, dictating the law and establishing his authority on the spot. However, so many years had passed and His Majesty had never been so unreasonable. Most of the time, he had been merciful and strict, fair in rewards and punishments. His methods had become gentler in recent years, rarely spilling blood. Why was he suddenly resorting to such indecent methods today? At this moment, the officials felt like they had returned to the time when the first emperor had ruled the country with his iron fist many years ago. One by one, they gave in. This official pledges. The last person to speak was the Board of Justice's Minister, Wu Lai. Minister Wu's face was flushed as he finally managed to speak. This official pledges 100 taels. Most of the officials who had pledged were between 100, 200, and 500,000 taels. Basically, no one was lower than this amount. Unexpectedly, the Board of Justice's minister had offered 100 taels. A kind-hearted person couldn't stand it any longer and secretly delivered a bag of silver to Lord Wu in the middle of the night, placing it in the courtyard of his house. But as long as he discovered it, he would throw it out without hesitation. Regardless of whether this action was done out of good intentions or a deliberate gift, in this official Wu's heart, he thought, I don't want silver that I shouldn't take. Even if I die of poverty, starvation, or suffering, I don't want it. In fact, Yunyang, Lord Supreme Cloud, had sent people to deliver silver and gold to Lord Wu's house many times. But even when he told him that it was a gift from the 9 Supremes, Lord Wu would still shake his head like a rattledrum and refuse to accept it. Sometimes, he would even reject His Majesty's extra reward. I've done my job well and His Majesty rewards me. I want it. It's the reward I deserve and I'm worthy of it. However, I feel that I haven't done my job well. Why should I accept His Majesty's reward? Why are you rewarding me? Isn't the reward and punishment unclear? I won't accept it. Sometimes, His Majesty would even be infuriated by this official's refusal to accept his reward. For such an official to fork out 100 silver taels was already far beyond what he could bear.
Well, Minister Wu.
His Majesty did not react to the other officials' pledges of 100 or 200 silver taels, but when he saw Wu Lai fork out 100 silver taels, he felt a throbbing pain in his heart. Forget about the silver taels you've pledged to donate.
Take the silver taels back and take care of your own life, His Majesty said with a sigh.
The pledge this time was done by all the officials. How can this humble official be an exception? I shouldn't be. I still have 173 taels at home. It's enough for this month's living expenses. A smile hung on Wu Lai's steely face. However, you still need to spend on your wife and children. The pledge this time is voluntary. You should do what you can to help others. His Majesty advised gently. Take it back. Wu Lai said seriously. Your Majesty, this official knows that the 100 silver taels I've pledged to donate is only a drop in the bucket. It doesn't help the bigger picture and can't be compared to others. However, this official is still a part of the Empire of Yutong. When the Empire is in trouble, this official thinks that it's my duty and responsibility to donate and help. Besides, this money is this official's own money. This official will take it if I want to, and not if I don't want to. His words were adorably blunt. In layman's terms, it was, your father's money, your father can spend it however he likes. What if *king do you have to do with it? Even if you're the emperor, do you have to care about how my salary is spent? His Majesty almost fell back from this sentence. Old Marshal Qiu and Lang Daoyin laughed at the same time. The two old men guffawed and pointed at Wu Lai.
This is AF** King Donkey.
Wu Lai replied stiffly. You're the donkeys. Your whole family are donkeys.
Puffed. His Majesty's anger turned into laughter, and he burst out laughing.
Other than Wu Lai, there was no one else who dared to insult the military saber and sword duo so openly.
This was something that even His Majesty dared not say.
But Wu Lai dared to. He had said it boldly and confidently, boldly, openly, and in high spirits. In his own words, your father has never let down the heavens, never let down the earth, never let down the king, never let down the people. No matter how powerful you are, why should your father be afraid of you? The civil and military officials in the imperial court could not help but snicker as they watched the two old marshals unable to react despite having eaten **T. These two old rogues had always relied on their unreasonable and brutal methods to dominate the imperial court. Today, they could finally see them speechless after being rebuked. How gratifying! This old man is willing to donate another 500,000 silver taels. A white-haired old official stood up. Even if I have to sell everything I have, I'll donate. Just to see these two old men being scolded and humiliated, this old man feels good. I'll donate this money to my heart's content. The current Prime Minister, Du Ruobing, stood up. This old man's wrinkled face was smiling like a blooming chrysanthemum. It was a pity that this old man had been suffering from these two old rogues for his entire life. I thought that I would no longer have the chance to take revenge as I was nearing my grave. Now that someone had helped me vent my anger, how could I not pay for the theater tickets? It's a pity that this old man only has 500,000 silver taels for my coffin. Otherwise, it would be worth it even if I had to pay 1 million. The old Prime Minister looked relieved. His Majesty lowered his head and covered his forehead with his hand. It could be seen that the old Prime Minister could die without regrets. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said things like this. His Majesty had raked in almost 19 million taels of silver from the donation drive. It was as if a large sum of money had fallen from the sky into his account. His Majesty felt relieved, but at the same time, he was suddenly filled with evil thoughts. He could not get rid of them. There's something wrong with these bastards' families. Especially some of them. If they only relied on their salaries, they wouldn't be able to fork out so much money even if they didn't eat or drink for 100 years. Moreover, I've never heard of their families owning any property. Where did they get the money they pledged to donate from? His Majesty pondered. The way he looked at some of them suddenly changed. The officials heaved a sigh of relief when they finally completed the donation drive that His Majesty personally presided over. Then they started to feel the pinch. The next step is for me and all of you to take out some items and send someone to auction them off at the auction outside. I believe we can still get some silver taels. Together with the donations we've collected today, it should be enough.
His Majesty was still not satisfied, so he struck again.
Cough, cough. All the officials in the imperial court coughed in unison. Your Majesty, you are so greedy at the sight of money. The imperial court meeting ended. Wu Lai walked out of the palace gate and saw old Marshal Qiu Zhenhan blocking his way when he lifted his head. What are you doing? Wu Lai looked at Qiu Zhenhan warily. Old Marshal Qiu was the leader of the Empire of Yutong's 3 greatest rogues and had always been infamous. It was one thing for Wu Lai to retort and rebuke the old marshal, but it was not surprising for the old marshal to settle the score and beat someone up. The old marshal scoffed and tossed a bag of silver taels over, saying, "This is the 2,000 silver taels I've lent you. Remember to return it to me when you have the money in the future. I'm lending it to you, not for free." He turned and left without another word. Wu Lai hugged the bag of silver taels. His Adam's apple quivered.
He felt a surge of warmth in his heart, unable to speak.
He could not help but recall last night. Last night, in the middle of the night, Wu Lai washed his wife's body and gave her medicine, but then he heard a painful groan from his son. It was his son who had woken up at night. Because his eyes were blind, he tripped, and because his body was weak, it was difficult for him to maintain his balance, so he fell heavily to the ground. He hurriedly gave his son medicine and helped him to bed. Then, just as he was about to fall asleep, someone suddenly floated in like a cloud. "Sir Wu. Who is it?"
Wu Lai had been calm then.
"This lowly one is acquainted with Sir Wu."
The person was masked and dressed in black, but his voice was friendly.
Sir Wu should have heard of me. I am the 8th of the 9 Supremes, Supreme Wind.
As he spoke, he waved his hand and a gust of wind blew in the enclosed room with its tightly shut windows.
The wind swept back and forth, stirring and gentle. It rolled up the things placed in the room and suspended them in the air, then gently put them down.
From the beginning to the end, the black-clothed man did not move his hands or feet at all, except for that first wave of his hand.
Is it really Sir Supreme Wind?
Wu Lai was agitated.
You! Chapter 163. Wu Lai was agitated. Supreme Wind smiled.
So Wu, I don't think that I'm here to bribe you, do you?
Wu Lai blushed. How could I? The 9 sirs are benevolent. How can this be considered a bribe? Even if it is a bribe, I will accept it shamelessly. Haha, Supreme Wind chuckled. Without another word, he took out a few pills and fed them to his mistress and young Master Wu before cultivating to clear their meridians.
The results of the examination made him heave a sigh of relief.
The child's blindness was only due to the poison. The bloodline in his eyeballs was not damaged. With the endless divine art and Emmy's help, it was not a big deal. Of course, this kind of poison was impossible for ordinary profound chi cultivators to deal with. The only thing he could do was the endless divine art.
It was only after he had treated His Majesty's poison that he realized the miraculous effect of his cultivation method.
I'm in so much pain when I add this explanation. So many people can't understand it. Luckily, there are enough words. Consider it a complimentary explanation. From then on, I will come once every night. Your son's eyes will be able to see again after about 10 days. About half a month later, his eyes will be back to normal and the poison in his body will be completely cleared. As for your wife, I can only help her regain her sanity and her health. However, this broken leg. There's really nothing I can do now. Wu Lai was on the verge of tears. It was the first time in so many years that Wu Lai, who had always been a righteous man, was so emotional. Wu Lai looked at the child blinking shyly and saw his mistress sleeping peacefully for the first time in so many years. Suddenly, tears fell like rain. When he came back to his senses, Supreme Wind had already disappeared without a trace. There was a note on the table. The handwriting was messy. Loyal warrior, loyal minister, heaven protects, the people have eyes. For the country and the people, one's bones will never be destroyed. Take care, sir. Yutong may last for 1,000 years. Recalling the scene last night, he weighed the silver taels tossed over by the old marshal. He knew that he would not accept it. That was why he had said that he would lend it to him and would return it in the future. My Wu Lai's face is valued by so many people. You're carefully protecting me for fear of hurting my pitiful self-esteem. Wu Lai took a deep breath, his eyes filled with steel-like determination. With the silver in his arms, he strode back to his house. With such a large number of loyal officials and warriors, there was no need to worry that Yutong could not prosper. He should do his part to achieve this feat. When Yun Yang went out again, he suddenly realized that the entire Tiantang city seemed to be much cleaner. It was already the 9th of October. There were still 11 days before Tai Zheng's wedding. At present, there were already 2 groups of people from other countries stationed outside the city. Tai Zheng's wedding was a toast to all the militants in the world. This was an important matter for all the soldiers in the world. Of course, this could easily become the fuse that would ignite the entire Tiantang city. Yun Yang decided that it was better to settle the matter of Tai Zheng's marriage before anything else. After all, this cup of wine belonged to all the soldiers in the world, whether they were alive or dead. They were qualified to drink this cup of wine. No matter what, Yun Yang would never allow such an event to be ruined. Stepping on the sparse yellow leaves on the ground, he walked slowly to the meeting place.
Young Master Yun, you're here.
Young Master Ma stood up eagerly, his face beaming. I only ask you, how much of the wine that was ordered earlier has been settled? Yun Yang asked faintly. Young Master Ma coughed and said, since young Master Yun mentioned it 2 months ago, this young brother did not dare to slack. I've worked through the night to change all the drunken immortal brew in stock to the blood of the hero label. Even the jars have been changed. Besides, the 20-odd branches under the Ma family have been producing day and night. As of now, There are already 85,000 jars of this new blood of the hero in stock. How much is a jar worth of silver tails? Yun Yang asked. I know. I've been working around the clock all this time. Young Master Ma smiled warmly. Young Master Yun has instructed, of course the quality has to be the best. The market price of each jar is about 600 silver taels. Each jar weighs 20 catties. Yun Yang frowned. 600 silver taels? One jar? 20 catties? Doesn't that mean that a catty of the blood of the hero is worth 30 silver taels? I say, young Master Ma, is your family planning to eat human flesh or drink human blood? Cough, if young Master Yun wants all of this batch of wine, you only need. Young Master Ma gritted his teeth and made up his mind. 200 silver taels per jar. Young Master Yun, according to this price, we've already lost all our manpower. Any less, our family will really. After all, the quantity is too large. Yun Yang snorted softly and did not speak as he held the teacup in his hand. He only calculated in his heart, 80,000 jars, 1,600,000 catties. 3 cups of wine per catty, 4,800,000 cups. Not enough, it's far from enough. Yun Yang said, I need at least 100,000 jars of the blood of the hero. Oh my God! Young Master Ma groaned, Boss, if we take out another 100,000 jars at this price, our family will be gone. Yun Yang looked at young Master Ma coldly. Meeting Yun Yang's gaze, young Master Ma finally lowered his head dejectedly. All right then. Don't be so disheartened. Yun Yang patted young Master Ma's shoulder. Your family will not suffer a loss. I promise. After this transaction is completed, as long as the wine produced by your family isn't priced too ridiculously and the quality is guaranteed, your family will definitely be famous throughout the continent. By then, it'll be hard for you not to be famous even if you want to. Young Master Ma smiled like he was crying. Thank you for your auspicious words. A total of 3,600,000 catties of wine. Yun Yang said, 10 silver taels per catty, that's a total of 36 million silver taels. Young Master Ma looked at Yun Yang with pleading eyes. We're brewing wine, not running a bank. We really don't have that much capital to put in. More than 70% of our family's cash is circulating everywhere. If Yun Yang were to ask for a debt, it would be a death sentence. I have 30 million silver taels here. Yun Yang took out a stack of banknotes. Young Master Ma breathed a sigh of relief. Although he still had to pay 6 million silver taels, it was already within an acceptable range. I will think of a way to get Marshal Tai Zheng's men to contact you and finalize the wedding wine. Yun Yang said leisurely, when the time comes, just give them the wine and ask them for 6 million silver taels. Young Master Ma lifted his head abruptly, his eyes filled with shock. Yun Yang turned and said faintly, Are you surprised? That day is a grand occasion for the world's militants. It's also a day that the warriors who died on the battlefield look forward to even in the afterlife. Young Master Ma, I hope that you will do this well. The wine cannot be inferior. The quantity must be sufficient. Also, don't tell anyone about me. Yun Yang turned and walked out the door, his purple robe fluttering. I'm counting on you. This is the favor that you all owed me back then. From today onwards, I will no longer use any means to threaten you all. Young Master Ma stood rooted to the spot for a long time while Yun Yang was long gone. Don't you worry. Young Master Ma suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Even if our Ma family has to go bankrupt, we'll make sure this matter is perfect. When Yun Yang returned to the residence of Yun, he could feel the eerie aura emanating from his home from afar. He sighed inwardly. What would come would come. It was just as well. It would be good to settle this matter once and for all before Tai Zheng's wedding. He had been walking in a hurry, but after feeling the aura, his pace slowed down. His emotions grew calmer as he got closer to his residence's door. In the backyard of the residence of Yun, a man dressed in black sat quietly in the pavilion under a flowering tree. Lao Mei was sprawled on a stone table, his status unknown. Feng Mafei looked weary, the front of his shirt drenched in blood. His face was pale, his body swaying as he leaned against a flowering tree. Although the man dressed in black was just sitting there, it was as if he had melted into the air. There was no sense of presence at all. He was like a cloud of black smoke that could vanish at any time with a gust of wind. Yun Yang walked in leisurely, as if he had not noticed the man dressed in black. He first walked to the stone table where Lao Mei was sprawled and took his pulse.
Confirming that he had only been knocked out and his meridians had been blocked, he was half relieved.
He then walked up to Feng Mafei and checked his pulse as well. His worries were finally put to rest. Before Yun Yang returned to the residence, the last thing he wanted to happen was to have casualties on his side, because that would push both sides to a dead end. Now that the two of them were injured but not dead, it meant that there was still room to turn the situation around. Feng Mafei, in particular, looked like he was in a bad state, but he had only suffered the punishment when he did not defend himself. His injuries were not severe. They were mostly flesh wounds. The man in black was like a cloud of black fog, but his entire face was shrouded in a layer of black fog. He seemed to be indifferent to Yun Yang's series of actions, but Yun Yang could feel that this person's aura had locked onto him since he was 100 feet away from his house. Yun Yang sat in front of the man dressed in black nonchalantly and said faintly, "First Court King Qingguang, one of the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld?" The man in black chuckled similarly. "Young Master Yun Yang of the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. You are indeed someone that Ling Xiaozue has taken a liking to." Yun Yang smiled. "I wonder what brings King Qingguang to my humble abode? I'm only here to see what you're capable of. What right do you have to keep someone from the concourse of the underworld here?" First Court King Qingguang chuckled darkly. The atmosphere between both parties grew tenser as if a fight was about to break out at any moment.
"If it's purely to see my ability,"
Yun Yang said quietly, "do you think it's necessary?"
"It is."
First Court King Qingguang said, "You're only at the 5th peak mystical chi level now. I shall suppress you with my mystical chi 5th peak cultivation base. If you lose, Feng Mafei will die. That's the price of betrayal, and you'll have to pay a corresponding price as well. Even if you have Ling Xiaozue behind you, you'll have to pay the price as well."
"What if I win?"
Chapter 164.
"You win."
First Court King Qingguang chuckled in disdain. "If you win, I'll let all of you live." Yun Yang kept quiet for a bit and said faintly, "One more condition.
"From now on, Feng Mafei has nothing to do with the concourse of the underworld."
First Court King Qingguang sneered again. "Just based on the fact that you dare to fight a battle you know you can't win. So what if I grant your wish?" Yun Yang regained his composure as he said softly, "Please."
First Court King Qingguang chuckled softly, but his laughter was like the chilling wind of the 9 serenities hell that had suddenly descended upon the mortal realm.
A gust of eerie fog expanded rapidly, enveloping 100 feet of land, including Yun Yang and himself within it. The sudden appearance of the fog blocked Yun Yang's vision.
He could not even see his fingers when he stretched them out. His eyes were clear.
Without hesitation, Yun Yang closed his eyes. His body moved with the wind and clouds. A gust of eerie wind blew from the thick fog, but Yun Yang did not move, allowing the gust to pass through his chest.
However, it was not as if Yun Yang was completely motionless. He pointed a finger at the same time the gust of eerie wind passed through him. A soft hum of acknowledgement came from the other end.
Then, a ferocious force came crashing down on Yun Yang. Yun Yang remained motionless.
His opponent's powerful kick that could shatter mountains fell from the top of his head all the way to the ground, but there was no resistance.
Yun Yang, who had been struck out with his palm when his body was already crippled. The target of the strike was the leg that had shattered his body. First Court King Qingguang snorted in surprise. Suddenly, he turned into a gust of chilly wind and spun rapidly around Yun Yang.
Countless gusts of chilly wind turned into sharp blades and arrows, attacking Yun Yang, who was in the thick fog from all directions.
Yun Yang could no longer maintain his unmoving state as he moved as well. His form was like the wind in the clouds, indistinct yet real. His body shifted at will, gathering and dispersing as he pleased. He engaged in a head-on battle with First Court King Qingguang amidst the thick fog. In this battle, the more Qingguang fought, the more he felt that the person in front of him was strange. The body of the person in front of him seemed to be even more insubstantial than him. He couldn't help but feel more depressed as he fought. Sometimes he would even be hit by this brat. Even though there was a huge difference in strength between them, and the brat couldn't hurt him at all, he would still lose face. Qingguang couldn't help but wonder if he could really win this battle. This was the first time King Qingguang's confidence that everything was under his control wavered. A cold light suddenly flashed.
An eerie and furious snort was heard.
An unprecedentedly majestic force suddenly burst out. Yun Yang grunted as he was flung away like a kite with a broken string. The dense and gloomy fog instantly disappeared without a trace. The outcome had been decided. Yun Yang, who had been sent flying, stood in the yard 70 feet away.
His eyes were as cold as ice and snow. He did not wipe the blood at the corner of his mouth as he said faintly, "You've lost."
First Court King Qingguang's face was abruptly covered in a ghastly fog as the air of menace intensified. Does it matter whether you win or lose? You did use the mystical chi of the 5th peak level at the start of the battle. However, you used the mist of the 9 underworlds instead.
Yun Yang said without a ripple of emotion. Besides, you started using the cultivation base of the 6th peak after 3 moves. As for the last move you used, Yun Yang's gaze was filled with mockery.
At least the cultivation base of the 8th peak and above. So you've lost this battle. Your Highness King Qingguang. Yun Yang smiled faintly. The concourse of the underworld keeps its promise indeed. The thick fog that enveloped First Court King Qingguang froze for a moment. It was obvious that he was enraged, the thick fog almost solidifying. However, for some reason, the intimidating aura suddenly disappeared. You've indeed won this battle. The dark fog on First Court King Qingguang's face dissipated, revealing a square face. It was the image of a middle-aged man in his late 30s. Now, the gaze he used to look at Yun Yang was tinged with bewilderment. Yun Yang smiled and walked back slowly, not worried that the other party would harm him. He said slowly, "If there's such a day, I'll let you live as well." First Court King Qingguang smiled eerily and asked, "Aren't you afraid of me?" Yun Yang smiled. "Why should I be afraid of you? Do you think you can kill me?" Hearing Yun Yang's words, First Court King Qingguang thought about it carefully and sighed softly, replying in a low voice, "I can't." He shook his head in bewilderment. "My cultivation base is at least 100 times stronger than your foundation, but I really can't kill you. Your cultivation method is strange and inexplicable." "It's amazing." Yun Yang smiled faintly. "Actually, what I like to do the most is to make friends. The more friends, the more options. Making enemies is too much of a waste of resources. It's not a wise choice." First Court King Qingguang's gaze flickered like a ball of will-o'-the-wisp. He chuckled strangely and said, "This reputed one's stance on this is the exact opposite of yours. What this reputed one has done in this life is to make enemies. I've never made friends." Yun Yang asked, "Aren't the other 9 court lords your friends as well?" First Court King Qingguang kept quiet for a bit and said faintly, "We're not friends." He enunciated each word clearly. "We're brothers." King Qingguang was bewildered by the current situation. Ever since he had uttered those words, this fellow's face had darkened and he had not spoken for a long time. The current situation puzzled him. What was wrong with this fellow? Was he possessed or was he scared stiff? Could he be envious, jealous, or hateful? Feng Mafei, who was standing on the side, looked at Yun Yang worriedly. It had to be said that King Qingguang did not intend to cause any trouble when he came this time. Firstly, he had other important matters to attend to this time, so it was not appropriate for him to cause unnecessary trouble. Secondly, and most importantly to the concourse of the underworld, there were those who had died in battle, those who had quit due to being crippled, and those who had committed suicide because they could not complete their missions. However, Feng Mafei was the first one who had made up his mind to leave. King Qingguang was curious about this and sought out Feng Mafei to ask for the reason. Feng Mafei boasted about Yun Yang's good points and how he had saved his life, and how he would die for his bosom friend. Only the truth, the reason that could clear King Qingguang's doubts, was not mentioned at all. This piqued His Highness King Qingguang's curiosity towards Yun Yang. Coming here and seeing Yun Yang, he felt a sense of empathy towards him. There was one more thing that made King Qingguang rather indignant. He bore the title of Hell's Ghost King. However, this fellow in front of him seemed to be unkillable and indestructible. It was as if his entire body did not exist. He was even more of a ghost than he was. Therefore, King Qingguang felt a sense of empathy, as if he had met his own kind. Of course, the main reason that made King Qingguang feel this way was because he realized that he really could not kill this fellow in front of him. His cultivation base was 100 times stronger than his opponent's, yet he could not kill him. King Qingguang felt extremely embarrassed. Most importantly, because he could not be killed, King Qingguang felt that this fellow would definitely be amazing in the future.
Why aren't you saying anything?
King Qingguang asked Yun Yang. I'm thinking of your 9 brothers. Yun Yang grinned, a smile that did not carry a hint of a smile.
I'm very envious of you.
What? His sullen face and silence earlier was actually because he was envious? Was there any jealousy? Envious? I've never made friends outside. Not a single one. King Qingguang said as if he meant it. However, if I must make friends outside, I'll put you first. Yun Yang smiled. Really? You think so highly of me? Really?
King Qingguang was not joking at all.
Your ranking is even higher than Ling Xiaozui's.
If this admiration was true, then it was truly an unparalleled admiration.
Yun Yang chortled. Since this is the result of today's battle, this matter shall be written off. Fang Mafei. King Qingguang turned to look at Fang Mafei.
From today onwards, you have nothing to do with the concourse of the underworld.
Thank you, Your Highness. Fang Mafei still looked a little dumbfounded. Was it settled just like that? So easy? Was it not a little too childish? Goodbye, friend. King Qingguang stood up and waved at Yun Yang. If there's a chance in the future, I'll bring you to the concourse of the underworld to play.
Ha! The gray fog of the underworld returned to him as King Qingguang turned into a gust of chilly wind and soared into the sky, vanishing without a trace in the blink of an eye.
That day won't be too far away. Yun Yang looked at the direction where King Qingguang had left and murmured, Perhaps we can meet again in Tiantang City. Sighing, he turned around and took 2 steps forward. For some reason, Yun Yang, who had clearly won the battle, suddenly turned around as if he had lost control of his emotions and kicked the entire stone table into the air. With a loud bang, the stone table exploded in midair. Lifting his head to face the dusty sky, Yun Yang shouted through gritted teeth, Do you think you're the only one with brothers? IF** King have brothers too. This was his response to First Court King Qingguang's words, We're not friends, we're brothers. The moment King Qingguang uttered each word solemnly, Yun Yang's heart was filled with endless envy and jealousy as he looked at the light in King Qingguang's eyes. That hysteria, until now, had finally been vented. However, even after venting his anger, he felt so powerless. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei, who had just woken up, were dumbfounded. From this short roar, they could hear the boundless heartache. Suddenly, they felt a pang of heartache. Tai Zheng had been frowning for the past few days. He realized that his budget was not enough. Chapter 165. Other than the grassland wolves and the southern border tribes who did not send anyone, the other 4 empires of the continent had sent quite a number of people. Each of the generals had made a similar request. Can you reserve 100 pots of wine for this general's wedding? This general requests that General Tai do me the honor. Our brothers who are unable to attend this banquet, whether alive or dead, would like to have a cup of this wine that belongs exclusively to militants. Can you reserve 1,000 caddies of wine for Marshal Tai's wedding? The men of our country's military. Those who can't attend are waiting for you. Thinking of these words, Tai Zheng wanted to curse. I can't even afford the wine for my own country. Why would I reserve it for you? Are you thinking too much? Of course, there was plenty of wine. As long as there were silver taels, forget millions of caddies of wine, even tens of millions of caddies could be bought. The Empire of Yutong alone had more than 10 million taels of wine. How could there be a shortage of wine? As for the wine for Marshal Tai Zheng's wedding banquet, all the taverns were happy to place their orders. However, the problem was that Tai Zheng did not have that much money to pay for the wine. Tai Zheng's wedding banquet had shaken the entire continent's military. The wine used for the wedding banquet could not be too lousy. If it was slightly inferior, it could not be used to entertain the guests. After all, the guests this time were related to the Empire of Yutong. Almost all the high-ranking military generals of the empires were here. How could they explain themselves if they did not bring out good wine? If they were to use the inferior wine that could be bought with a tael of silver, would they have to drink all the generals of the opposing countries to death here? Drinking too much would really cause trouble. Even the cheapest wine that could be served at the wedding banquet would cost 10 silver taels a caddy. Even if they were to use this kind of wine that cost 10 silver taels a caddy, The entire wedding banquet would need at least 2 million caddies of it. That would be 20 million silver taels. How could Tai Zhang have so much silver taels? Even if Tai Zhang sold all his bone marrow, he would not be able to gather it.
Because of this matter, General Tai had been frowning and sighing every day during this period of time.
His Majesty had just started a donation drive and emptied everyone's pockets. He could not even borrow money from anyone. He did not regret making this decision back then, he was just fretting. Silver taels. Silver taels.
Sometimes, Tai Zhang was so worried that he could not sleep at night, thinking, should I send 20,000 men in 10 directions to suppress the bandits? That could also be regarded as a way to make money, a way to solve the problem. Commander-in-Chief. The leader of the guard said, someone from the Ma family is here to see you?
Who? Tai Zhang asked impatiently. Which Ma family? It's the Ma family, the Empire of Yutong's top tavern. The leader of the Janissaries said excitedly, their young master Ma Chenglu is here. Call him in. Tai Zhang was puzzled. The Ma family's wine had always been high-end. The lowest quality wine among all the wines seemed to cost 7 to 8 silver taels a caddy. It was obvious that it did not match the wine he was going to use at his wedding. Why had they come to him?
Young Master Ma's first sentence when he arrived was enough to make Tai Zhang overjoyed. I've long heard of Marshal Tai's grand wedding. Coincidentally, we have a batch of wine that has been stored for a long time. We're willing to sell it to Marshal at the lowest price. Please do us the honor, Marshal. How much wine? Tai Zhang's interest was piqued. 4 million caddies. Ma Qinglu said, a pot is 20 caddies, a total of 200,000 pots. So much. Tai Zhang was shocked. Then, he thought that this amount of wine would be enough to handle the wedding. However, what about the price? As he thought about it, Tai Zhang asked weakly, how much for a caddy? He thought to himself, since the wine produced by the Ma family of golden spears and iron horses has been stored for a long time, it must be a high-end premium wine. Even if it's sold at a low price, it should be at least 15 to 20 silver taels. If it's 20 silver taels, it's 80 million silver taels. If this fellow really says something similar, your father will beat him out. Look at me. Do I look like someone who has 80 million silver taels? Are you trying to fool your father? Your father only has 20 million now. What's there to worry about? How about 6 million silver taels for this humble shop's 4 million caddies of wine? When young Master Ma Qinglu said this, his heart was filled with emotion. Yun Yang. My great young Master Yun, why are you doing this? A whole 30 million silver taels had been tossed out without batting an eyelid. You didn't even let others know. Ma Qinglu did not know that it was not only the 30 million silver taels that were used to buy the wine. Even the money that was to be paid for Tai Zhang's wedding and the wine had come from Yun Yang. After His Majesty's incident, Tiantang City's money supply was unprecedentedly tight. It was rare for anyone to make a large transaction. Tai Zhang's initial plan to sell his 2 manors and years of rewards in exchange for money could not be formed. No one would buy it even if it was sold at a discount. If not, why would Yun Yang need to go through so much trouble? Can't afford what? Just as Tai Zhang uttered the word subconsciously, his eyes widened. How much did you say? He could hardly believe his ears. 6 million silver taels? 4 million caddies? 5 silver taels for a caddy? So cheap. Could it be inferior wine? Tai Zhang looked at Ma Chenglu suspiciously. This was probably the only explanation. Otherwise, how could it be so cheap? It must be inferior wine or else it wouldn't have been stored for so long. To reassure Marshal, I've brought 100 pots of wine today. Ma Qinglu said, it's just outside, Marshal can have a taste. Pots of wine were brought in. However, Tai Zhang fell in love with the wine jar at first glance. The green wine jar was not the usual oval shape. Instead, it was long and had distinct edges and corners. A large piece of red cloth sealed the mouth of the pot. It was as red as blood. On the red cloth were 3 large black words. Blood of the hero. Just this pot, this piece of red cloth, and these 3 words made Tai Zhang's eyes redden. Even if this wine was slightly inferior, he would still want it. On the back of the pot, the same piece of red cloth was written with small words. Loyal heart and blood to protect the country, loyal soul to build the fortress.
Tai Zheng felt like he was struck by lightning, stunned as tears flowed down his cheeks.
When the wine was poured out, it was as red as blood, the aroma of the wine filling the air.
Tai Zheng's hands were shaking as he picked up a bowl and drained it in one gulp, feeling a burning heat rush into his throat. Immediately after, a raging fire started burning in his stomach.
Great wine.
Truly great wine. Tai Zheng's words were accompanied by his tears.
My brothers will definitely be satisfied, he asked in a trembling voice. Are all the wines of this standard?
Yes,
Ma Chenglu said loudly. If there's a pot of inferior quality, this humble house will not charge a single cent for all the wine.
Tai Zheng sucked in a deep breath and grabbed Ma Chenglu's hand, overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you. Which man in the military did not like wine? It was the same for Tai Zheng.
How could he not feel that the quality of the wine was not inferior at all? It was definitely of the highest quality.
5 silver taels for a caddy. It was no different from giving it away for free. With such a price, young Master Ma's family would have to suffer a great loss. Ma Chenglu hesitated and said, Marshal need not take it to heart. The Ma family did not suffer a great loss in this transaction. We were entrusted by someone. Marshal should be thanking us, not us. He finally said it out loud. Tai Zheng was shocked. Who? Please forgive me for not being able to tell you. Ma Chenglu said, that person has reminded me time and time again not to reveal it. Marshal, please do not make things difficult for me. I wish Marshal a happy wedding. Ma Chenglu took 2 steps back and bid farewell with a salute. I also hope that the brothers in the military can drink to their heart's content. This humble one shall take his leave. Wait. Tai Zheng called out to him, I'll bring the banknotes, you can take them away. Tai Zheng took out the banknotes and insisted on paying an additional 2 million taels. Ma Chenglu refused resolutely and went home with the 6 million taels banknotes. In the afternoon of the same day, men from the military were dispatched to coordinate with the Ma family's business to send carts of fine wine into Tai Zheng's residence. 2 large warehouses that had been emptied earlier were filled in the time it took to make a cup of tea. Then, in the courtyard, a group of men from the military were sweating profusely, stacked neatly like a mountain. The entire courtyard was filled, but only a third of it was filled. A piece of land was flattened outside the courtyard, surrounding the military camp and storing the wine in the center. When everything was done, 1,000 soldiers were drenched in sweat. Open a few pots quickly. Brothers, you've worked hard. Let us drink first and relax. Tai Zheng was about to move the wine as he spoke. Then, 2 janissaries pounced on him and hugged him tightly. Marshal. No need, no need, no need. Tai Zheng turned back and looked at the soldiers whose faces were streaked with sweat. Aren't all of you tired? What's wrong with treating all of you to this general's wedding wine? Aren't you going to give this general some face?
No, no, no. One of the janissaries gulped, smiling honestly.
There's really no need.
This isn't just Marshal's wedding wine, it's also the wedding wine of all our brothers who have been through life and death, the wedding wine of all our brothers who are alive and dead. If it was any other time and any other wine, it would be fine. But this wine, if we don't drink it on that day, we will feel guilty. We completely understand Marshal's feelings, but this time, we truly appreciate it. The leader of the janissaries said seriously, after Marshal's wedding, if there's still wine left, we can drink it. If we drink a few pots today and there are a few pots missing on that day, even if the brothers die immediately, we will be too ashamed to show our faces. How can we face our fallen brothers in the underworld? Looking at the sincere faces, Tai Zheng felt his throat suddenly choking. All right. Good brothers. Tai Zheng stumbled into the room and suddenly guffawed, howling into the sky. Brothers, do you see this wine? Do you see it? This is my wedding wine, our wine. Your wine. His voice was completely hoarse when he uttered the last few words. Chapter 166. 1,000 men are not enough.
The captain of the janissaries looked serious. Send another 2,000 men here. From today onwards, this wine is our life.
Even if all 3,000 of our brothers die in battle, not a single drop of this wine can be missing.
We brothers are not the only ones here. Underground, there are millions of loyal souls of our brothers waiting for it.
The captain of the Janissaries' eyes were rimmed red. We wait for that day to raise our goblets with all our brothers alive and dead. As long as I think of that day, that moment, as long as I can experience that day, that moment, that goblet of wine, I will have no regrets in this life. On the 11th of the 10th month, Tiantang City began to impose a curfew. Water was poured on the streets and yellow soil was used to pad the roads. The number of patrols on the streets had tripled. All the shops in Tiantang City, regardless of their origins or background, received the notice. Within a month, no one was allowed to cause any trouble. Violators would be shut down without question and would not be allowed to open again within a month. Everything else would be dealt with a month later. On the 12th of the 10th month, some of the larger shops and important buildings had begun to be cleaned. They were decorated with red ribbons and the atmosphere was joyous. On the 13th of the 10th month, 3 of the armies stationed outside the city had arrived. The military representatives of the other countries that were scheduled to come were also gradually approaching in an endless stream. On the 15th of the 10th month, the Empire of Dongxian, Marshal Han Sanhe, who was hailed as the god of war, had arrived with his army. The entire Tiantang city was in an uproar. However, it was not a joyous occasion, but a seething hatred. They wanted nothing more than to cut him into 1,000 pieces and kill him as soon as possible. Dongxian and Yutong had just finished their war not too long ago. The Empire of Yutong, the victorious party, had still paid the price of hundreds of thousands of casualties. The blood of the sacrificed warriors had yet to dry, their corpses had yet to turn cold, and their souls had yet to leave. Han Sanhe had arrived in Tiantang City with such a light entourage. How could he not stir up a commotion? Undercurrents were surging and the repercussions were unprecedented. A letter of credence of peace, those who come are guests, a grand event for the military, we shall not stop until we are drunk. Unique since time immemorial, this is the only one. It will be passed down through the ages, a good name will last forever. Do not shame the hero, do not let the soul of the hero feel guilty. The short leaflets were delivered by tens of thousands of soldiers from door to door. 3 soldiers formed teams. One knocked on the door while another stepped forward to salute, presenting the leaflets with both hands. There was another one who was carrying a thick stack of leaflets. Please understand. This is the wish of countless brothers. Thank you for fulfilling it. He gave one to every family, every inn, and every shop. As long as there were people, Yutong soldiers would send the same leaflet. Other than being an enemy, the visitor was also a militant, a warrior who was as brave as Yutong's warriors. His purpose of coming here was to celebrate Tai Zheng's wedding, who was also a militant, and he had come on behalf of countless Dongxian warriors. Even though both parties had different standpoints, they should at least show due respect and reverence at this moment. Whatever grudge there was, he could settle it on the battlefield, but he could not act recklessly now.
The hidden undercurrent instantly calmed down.
Some of the elderly who had not yet been delivered their leaflets had opened their doors early in the morning, prepared some food and tea, and placed them at the door. Seeing the soldier handing out leaflets walking over, he tried his best to persuade him to stay.
Child, work hard and fight well. Take care. We understand all of you. Child, kill more when you go to the battlefield in the future. My second son has just died at the Fortress of Resilience a few days ago. Seeing all of you makes me feel like I've come home again. You must eat, drink, and rest for a while before you leave. You've worked hard. An old lady gripped the soldier's hand tightly, gently caressing the scar on the soldier's face. Her face was filled with pity. Child, you've suffered. Every soldier who went to distribute the leaflets came back with bloated stomachs and red-rimmed eyes. It was quiet in the city. The top of the city was quiet. Outside the city, it was quiet as well. Half of the continent's generals had gathered here, their banners fluttering in the wind. Han Sanhe walked out of his tent slowly and came to a slightly higher mound, looking at Tiantang City from afar. The chilly autumn wind blew against his face, almost causing him to lose his footing. In spite of this, Han Sanhe stood quietly, looking at the flags above Tiantang City and the Yutong soldiers who were exceptionally energetic today. He stared at them for a long time without moving. Marshal. Zhang Ge walked forward, holding a cloak in his hand. Han Sanhe waved his hand to stop him.
He only stared at the cloak and murmured, Yutong's destiny has yet to decline.
Zhang Ge and the other 2 men stood behind Han Sanhe, watching with widened eyes. Marshal, where did you see that from? How come we didn't see anything? Do you know? Han Sanha said softly. There are so many countries in the continent. There are even countries that are eyeing us now, but this old man has never taken them to heart. It was only when we were fighting Yutong that this old man had to act personally, even when I knew it was a trap. Why was that? Did you not know about it beforehand and did not discuss it afterwards? The three men were stunned. Thinking about it, it seemed like it had been like this all these years. Han Sanha would only act personally when the Empire of Yutong was at war.
As for the other countries who had only sent one of the three of them or some other generals, he had never cared about it.
In the past, they had thought that the marshal thought too highly of himself and did not want to act personally. Now, it seemed like there was another reason. May I ask what is the reason, Marshal? Zhang asked, scratching his head in confusion. Although the ranking of the continent's famous generals is only a gimmick to attract attention, there are many things within that are worth pondering. Han Sanha squinted against the autumn wind and said faintly, have you noticed that the Empire of Yutong occupies 17 of the top 50 famous generals in the continent? This ratio is higher than any of our countries. As for the top 10 famous generals, Yutong's ratio is even more terrifying. They occupy 3 of the spots. Han Sanha said faintly, perhaps all of you don't know this, but the Empire of Yutong once occupied 7 of the top 10 spots of the continent's famous generals. 7? Mu Wuyun and Gao Han, who were standing aside, were shocked. Zhang Gu was shocked as he asked, is it because of the Shangguan family of generals? That's right. Out of the 7 famous generals of Yutong, 5 of them belong to the Shangguan family of generals. The other 2 were Yutong's old marshals. They've passed away many years ago, but the glory of Yutong's military back then was truly awe-inspiring. Even when this old man thinks about it now, I'm still shocked and terrified.
If it weren't for the collusion between the 3 countries' allied army and the 36 ambushes that killed all of Yutong's Shangguan family of generals, the world would have long been Yutong's territory.
Han Sanha's voice was heavy. After that battle, Yutong could no longer expand, but the number of famous generals and marshals was endless. No matter what era it was, Yutong's famous generals were always more than the other countries, and they were also much stronger.
Do all of you know why this is so?
Han Sanha's voice grew heavier. Why is this so?
Gao Han was rather indignant.
Is Yutong's military talent so high? Are there only so many talents?
Not really.
Han Sanha said faintly, Yutong's strength comes more from its geography. Since the Empire of Yutong was founded, its capital has been located in Tiantang City. The entire Empire of Yutong's territory is the center of half the continent. The Empire of Yutong's greatest strength is because it is attacked from all sides.
Han Sanha heaved a deep sigh.
The Empire of Yutong's generals are at war almost every year. Any one of them is a general who is used to the battlefield, a general who has been through hundreds of battles.
To be said to be a general who has been through hundreds of battles, in the eyes of Dongxian and Dayuan, Tianxi, Zhou, and the other 4 empires, other than a handful of generals, even if the others have been praised as having been through hundreds of battles, it's actually just a glorification. Other than the Empire of Yutong's generals, there's hardly any other country's general who dares to say that they've been through hundreds of battles. In fact, the number of generals who have actually fought in so many battles is probably less than 30 across the entire continent.
However, the Empire of Yutong's generals have been through hundreds of battles. Hundreds of them. They're not just fighting with their lives, they're fighting with their entire lives. Do you understand the difference? The wars we've faced are mostly against the other forces, but the Empire of Yutong's soldiers have fought the east, then the south, then the west, then the north and even the northeast, southwest and so on. Whether they come to attack us or not, we'll still attack them. This is a never-ending cycle, and neither side has a choice. After such a cycle, how can someone who has survived hundreds of battles not be terrifying? Yet, any country in the continent can't bypass Yutong if they want to expand their territory. Han Sanha sighed tiredly after speaking so much. So, Yutong's strength is acknowledged by the world. We have to admit it, we have to admit it. I'm old. Even if I manage to hold on, I can't fight for more than a few years. But you must remember, when you meet the Empire of Yutong's generals on the battlefield in the future, no matter who they are, famous or not, you must never let your guard down. If Yutong survives, It will be the Empire of Yutong that can unite the world in the future. Unless Yutong falls first, only then will the other countries have the chance to fight for supremacy in this chaotic world. Actually, isn't this the main reason why the four empires rarely fight each other, but we've all sent troops to Yutong? Han Sanha said softly, Yutong is the world's enemy. The world fears it. Look at the soldiers on top of the city wall now. Han Sanha lifted his gaze. Chapter 167. On top of the city wall, Yutong's soldiers were clad in bright armor, their bodies tall and straight.
Even the sabers and swords in their hands seemed to be glowing under the sunlight.
They paced back and forth, disciplined and high-spirited. Do you see that? It's not a request from the general or a high-pressure imperial edict.
The expressions on their faces are from the bottom of their hearts.
They're using this method to demonstrate their might to us. The expression on each of their faces is the crystallization of pride and glory.
Let me tell you, these soldiers who are proud to be born in such a country and to be able to protect such a country are the strongest soldiers.
A country and people that can nurture such soldiers is the greatest nation and people. When Yutong's soldiers fight, the slogan they shout the most is to protect the country. It's because they're constantly being beaten. That's why they shout to protect.
As for the soldiers of other countries, even the Empire of Dongxian, many of them are thinking of fighting a war as soon as possible, gaining military merit, getting promoted and getting rich.
Han Sanha's voice was tinged with bleakness. This is different. It's fundamentally different. When the slogan of protecting the country is shouted too many times, it will naturally become the spiritual belief of the nation's soldiers. Once such a belief is formed, Han Sanha uttered word by word solemnly, it's the scariest thing in this world. It's indestructible. Yutong repels Dongxian to the east, fights Tianxi to the north, Zhou to the west, Dayuan to the south. Even when it's surrounded by enemies, it's still safe and sound. Han Sanha chuckled bitterly. If Yutong's entire nation's strength was only enough to face any one of the four empires, I'm afraid this country would have long become a part of Yutong's territory. I've only known today that Yutong is actually so terrifying. The three generals sucked in a cold breath. I've never talked about Yutong's history and foundation before this because I'm afraid of wearing down your morale and confidence. It's a pity that this old man is old. If I don't take this opportunity to tell you all about these things today, you'll lose everything if you're not careful when you go up against Yutong's valiant generals in the future. Even if it's an ordinary Yutong cavalryman who has survived hundreds of battles, he can be a captain who commands 500 cavalrymen when he goes to our country. He'll perform exceptionally well too. And this is only a comparison between individual soldiers. My only hope now is to breach the fortress of resilience in my remaining years and incorporate the 7,000 miles of fertile land east of Yutong into Dongshuan's territory. That will be enough. Han Sanha said solemnly. Once Yutong loses that huge territory, its power will decrease by a third. By then, all the countries will be at ease, especially Dongxian. We can unify the world if we advance and live in peace if we retreat. Marshall's wish will definitely come true. Didn't we almost accomplish this last time? Mu Wuyun said.
It's a pity that I won't have such an opportunity again.
Han Sanha uttered the word quietly and continued. What I'm most worried about now is the empire of Yutong's emperor, Yu Peiza. If Tai Zhang had organized such a wedding in any other country other than the empire of Yutong, he would have been beheaded long ago. However, in Yutong, it could be held successfully.
His Majesty the Emperor had even personally issued a letter of credence for peace to promote this grand event for the militants.
How magnanimous!
There's not even the slightest bit of suspicion between the Emperor and his subjects.
What more can I ask for when I serve you like this? Han Sanha sighed wistfully. It was not only Han Sanha, the generals of the other countries were quietly observing Tiantang City as well. There was not the slightest hint of hostility in Tiantang City. It only stood quietly in the distance. The city gates were wide open and there were countless people entering and exiting the city. Peace and serenity filled their eyes.
However, it was this peace and harmony that caused the pupils of these battle-hardened generals to contract. The passers-by who came and went looked at them, at their own military base, the hatred in their gazes, the fists that were clenched tightly. Also, the silhouettes of them leaving with their heads held high without doing anything. Those were just ordinary citizens.
The letter of credence for peace is a grand event for the militants. During this period of time, we won't lay a hand on you. We won't make a move until all of you leave Yutong safely. Because we can't let our warriors lose face, we can't let our loyal souls be shamed. Life and death, victory and defeat are all decided on the battlefield. This is our pride. These words were not spoken by Yutong's people, but all the generals who had come had heard them clearly. They saw it too. Half in awe and half in fear. The 16th of October. 3,000 troops began to hold a large-scale ceremony to sweep the graves. A red cloth was hung on the door of each family that had injured soldiers or soldiers who had died in the war. A line of words was written on the red cloth. Emerald blood loyal heart protects home and country. Iron bones loyal soul builds impregnable fortress. Yun Yang had put aside all other matters, whether he had clues or not, to prepare for this event with all his might. He had learned to be more obedient now. There were too many experts in this world. Not to mention Ling Xiaozue, Supreme Lord Spring Frost, and the rest who were abnormally powerful. Just the concourse of the underworld's King Qingguang alone was not only powerful, he could also make Yun Yang envious. Who knew if he would attract the attention of other experts if he acted rashly? It was better to be more cautious now. The autumn wind whistled. He melted into it at once, hovering high in the sky and looking down at the land. Although the number of generals from various countries who had come this time was not many, they were all elites. There were even quite a number of superb experts among them. The intimidating aura made Yun Yang extremely wary. The only thing that surprised him was that since that day, the four noble young masters had been surprisingly well behaved. They had been busy with something during this period of time. They did not look for him, nor did they go to the Cirrus house. They only knew that they were still in Tiantang City. They seemed to be contacting their respective families intensively. There seemed to be quite a number of high-level experts from the four families who had come as well. However, there was no concrete movement. They seemed to be waiting for some news. This was the message sent by the Nine Heavens dictum. As for what exactly they were waiting for, it was unknown. The sound of hooves could be heard outside the city gate. A troop of men and horses was clad in bright armor, almost dazzling to the eyes. It was Tai Zhang who had come out to welcome the guests. Half of the continent's famous generals had come to attend Tai Zhang's wedding. There was no doubt that it was sensational and would definitely be recorded in history. However, Tai Zhang's wedding could not be held in the city. Firstly, the city did not have such a large venue for the reception. There would be at least tens of thousands of people from Yutong's military participating. Including the soldiers, there would be hundreds of thousands of people. In addition to the military personnel from various countries, even if there were not many of them, there would still be thousands of people from each family. Adding on the number of people, there would be hundreds of thousands of people sitting together to drink. The space needed would be huge. Secondly, and more importantly, it was worry. The military personnel from various countries had said that they were here for He Tiezhing's wedding and had gathered at this military gathering. But who knew what they were really thinking? It was hard to tell who was human and who was a ghost. The risk of letting tens of thousands of soldiers from other countries into Yutong's capital was too great. Therefore, outside the south gate, the flat land was filled with tables and tables, all of them arranged neatly, stretching as far as the eye could see, as if they could be lined up all the way to the horizon. A high platform was draped in red and many soldiers were busy working there. They had arranged it so meticulously that the position of each piece of wood was exceptionally careful. The shape and size of each piece of wood had strict requirements. They seemed to want to turn this high platform into a perfect piece of art. This was the main venue for Tiezhing's wedding. Yun Yang turned into a gust of wind and returned to the city, going to the Shangguan family of generals. During this period of time, Yun Yang would visit the 6 children whenever he had the time. Yun Yang was genuinely surprised by the Shangguan children's determination and tenacity, and was even more impressed. Once they obtained the high-tier martial art manuals, the 6 children eagerly threw themselves into training. In spite of this, the usual physical training did not stop, continuing at the original pace. Some of them even showed signs of increasing the intensity of their training. With the nourishment of the superior cultivation method, complemented by the high-intensity physical training, the 6 children's growth was at an unimaginably fast rate. The result, or rather the current situation, made Yun Yang fall into deep thought. After returning home,
He had set up a training base in his residence of Yun and began to torture himself with all his might.
Yun Yang's plan was to torture himself for 7 days and see how it worked.
He wanted to confirm the success of such extreme training, whether it was good or bad, and how much benefit it could bring if it was good.
Yun Yang's torture was truly playing with his life. At the beginning of each training session, he would first execute 3 forms of Destiny's Merciless Saber. Without Emmy's super recovery, the 3 forms of Merciless Saber drained all the mystical qi in his body. Then, he would undergo extreme training like the Shangguan 6 children, tormenting his physical strength until there was nothing left. In the end, Yun Yang, who had been training intensely, was completely relying on his willpower. It was only until he could no longer hold on and was close to passing out, lying on the ground like a dead dog, drenched in sweat. Only then did he activate his mystical qi and cultivate the endless divine art to recover himself. It had only been a day, but Yun Yang could clearly feel the immense benefits of such training. His mystical qi recovered.
From the initial strands of condensation, it turned into a monstrous wave that surged upwards with the force of an avalanche. When he had fully recovered, Yun Yang actually felt that the thickness of his inner qi had increased a notch out of nowhere. After his body had recovered from the extreme fatigue, there was a subtle feeling of his muscles and bones being strengthened. What was more obvious was his willpower and deific consciousness. There was no need to talk about his willpower, but as for his deific consciousness, amidst Emmy's delighted reaction, Yun Yang realized that the space where Emmy was hiding had actually expanded a little.
Was it a surprise? Was it a surprise? Haha. But the recommendation votes and monthly votes are so pitiful. Please recommend. Please vote. If today's monthly votes are okay, I'll bring my laptop to the meeting tomorrow. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.